3 months, hours of research, and 50 pages of notes later, we're here. Welcome to my Gilmore Girls video. Gilmore Girls is one of those shows that just sticks with people that I didn't realize people rewatch every autumn, and that has such a loyal fan base and still is talked about. But what made this show so successful? Why did it matter so much? So today we're looking at some of the unhealthy relationships you didn't realize were toxic in the show, Rory's boyfriends and why some of them were so disliked by the fandom, and the show's concerning portrayal of food and diet. Gilmore Girls started at a time when audiences were desperate for more female-centered shows. And then when Gilmore Girls arrived on the scene, people loved to spend their spare time arguing over whether Rory and her mother Lorelai are actually terrible people or not, because they are flawed female characters, and as we know, there is a certain pressure on female characters to be likable, much more than there is for guys. So we're going to start with breaking down each of the main characters and what I think of them, starting with Emily Gilmore, because in order to understand the later generations of Gilmore Girls women like Lorelai and Rory, you need to understand where they came from. So in the pilot episode, Lorelai has this rekindled relationship with her mum, and she's not too pleased about it, but it's kind of this forced contact thing because she wants money to pay for her daughter's school, and unfortunately she feels like maybe she needs to turn to her parents, which is the last thing she wants to do because A, she doesn't want to owe them anything, and B, they just don't get along. The writers really play with the idea of who is to blame for the failure of their relationship, and this is really emphasized by when Emily asks Lorelai almost pitifully, why can't we have the kind of relationship that you and Rory have? In her own way, Emily is really sad about the fact that she doesn't have a good relationship with her daughter, but she's just completely lacking an awareness as to how it got to this point. And Lorelai responds, well, it's different with me and Rory. We're best friends first and mother and daughter second. And Emily's like, well, I don't know how to do that. I was raised to be a mother and a role model, not a friend.
Rory and I are best friends, Mom.
Emily and Lorelai have such starkly different personalities that it's easy to understand why they just wouldn't get along. Richard's mother disapproves of Emily as Emily moved up in the class system to marry into this rich family. So she's done very well for herself, and at that time, that was like the pinnacle of success. Her whole purpose of attending university was to search for a husband and that financial stability. And her marriage does represent the typical male breadwinner and wife who stays at home. Lorelai's lifestyle is very different, like her rushed engagements and her dating around. Like, it's just not the sort of thing that her mum would have done. So her mum disapproves of the way that Lorelai chooses to live her life. But from the moment Emily is introduced in the pilot episode, we see the fear in Lorelai's eyes, the anxiety around the idea of even needing to speak to her mother, the way it makes her all jittery, and I realized that something far more morbid was going on. In fact, we start to see huge red flags of some very deeply narcissistic, controlling, and emotionally abusive behavior. Why do so many fans defend and overlook this?
Mom, the timing was never right for us.
That's because you dawdle time away. You could have been the person to help him get his life together, but you made no effort.
Oh, so now this comes down to something I didn't do? Don't put that on me, Mother!
What other explanation is there? But you've always kept him at arm's length. You keep everyone at arm's length.
That's not true.
Often the fight is started from Emily making some kind of snide remark or insulting the way Lorelai dresses, and then when Lorelai calls her out on it, she feigns ignorance or is genuinely surprised because she's like, oh, I don't understand what you mean. Emily says to Lorelai, I gave you the best of everything. I gave you the finest opportunities, and I'm so tired of hearing about how I was so suffocating and so controlling. This shows that Emily does not believe herself to be a controlling mother, but then you have to ask, well, how did this happen then? How did your relationship get so shattered? Clearly someone's messed up somewhere. This relationship is so much darker than people thought, and this is so much deeper than people saying it's just a show, like don't overanalyze it, and that whole anti-intellectual approach, which I disagree with. I think sometimes you can't help but critically analyze these things and notice these things, even though of course I'm aware this is just entertainment, it's just a show. Still, there was a generation of people that watched Gilmore Girls. Emily throws a birthday party for Rory and invites all these people, and it wasn't something she asked was okay with Rory in season 1, she just does it, and that was controlling. Even though it seems harmless, it seems like she's just doing it from a place of care, it's not really caring because she's not checking in with the other person, and she's practically forcing the girls to attend these Friday night dinners, even though they may not want to. Then if they have to miss it, or maybe they have a date or something on Friday night, she just isn't understanding about it. She forces her husband to go to an event she doesn't want to go to, again controlling. Then Emily buys a parking space for Rory without checking with Lorelai first if that's okay, or if Rory even needs a parking space. I do have a few things to say in defense of Emily because I'm aware she's not all bad and there's a reason why so many people like her. For example, there are times when she tries to extend an olive branch to Lorelai, but Lorelai is so, I guess at this point, paranoid and defensive that she just can't bring herself to try and fix things with her mum. Emily felt hurt and betrayed because she wants to connect with her granddaughter Rory, but she feels as if Lorelai is bitter and prideful and intentionally restricting the time that Emily can have with her granddaughter. Some of her gestures in her own way were harmless, like she wanted to redecorate Rory's room when she went to uni, so she stocked it with all this expensive furniture, and that was genuinely just her way of trying to express love through her money. Also, she wants Rory to beat the competition. She wants to pay Rory's way into these expensive opportunities because she wants Rory to succeed. She wants her to have the best of everything. And when Lorelai refuses her that, she's like, why? Emily cares in her own way about Rory. However, this generosity comes at a price. The best analogy I can give is how in the Disney movie The Little Mermaid, Ursula seems to be Ariel's savior and trying to help her get on land to meet the humans, which is what Ariel's always wanted. But Ursula doesn't just offer this, it comes at a price, which is Ariel giving up her speaking voice. Emily is Ursula. There's this financial abuse happening where she makes Lorelai feel obligated to spend time with her because she's paying for Chilton, she's paying for this, she's paying for that. One good example of this is regarding the termites situation, where termites were eating the front porch and bits of the house, and Lorelai obviously wanted to get rid of them. Then Rory approached Emily regarding this because she felt like her mum was too prideful to do it and she just wanted to fix the problem, even though her mum asked her multiple times, do not go to my parents, we need to fix it ourselves, I don't want to get them involved in this. Lorelai asks Emily what the price would be for helping out, and Emily acts hurt and angry, like, there's no prize, God, why can't I just help you? There was a price. The whole time. She just didn't tell Lorelai, and she was setting up DAR meetings at the inn, which Lorelai hadn't agreed to.
Mom, I want to apologize to you.
For what?
Well, I'm just not used to people doing things without strings attached, that's all.
Well, that almost sounded sincere. All right, I accept your apology.
Thank you.
By the way, I'm going to be having my DAR meetings at the inn from now on. I hope you don't mind.
Isn't it funny how she gaslights Lorelai, she plays victim, but yet Lorelai's accusation was actually truthful. Lorelai then goes on a date with this rich guy called Peyton, I think, and she just doesn't like him, she finds him boring and dull, and she doesn't want to go on another date. And of course, Emily should listen to her daughter, ask her how she felt. Instead, Emily is appalled, furious that Lorelai would reject this guy Peyton because it's the sort of guy that she imagined her daughter marrying. And she's not asking her daughter why she feels a certain way. She's just like, God, Lorelai, how do you ruin everything? You have to go on another date. We're going to make this happen. It's appalling. Lorelai is a grown woman. She's like 32. She can choose who she wants to date. If Lorelai rejects him, Emily is worried about her not fitting in with the other women in her upper class circle and them talking bad about her. And so she blames Lorelai for this insecurity. And again, it shows that Emily is a highly narcissistic mother because she's focused more on her needs and her insecurities rather than what's the healthiest for her daughter. Emily barely says sorry, ever. She barely apologizes. They don't talk, they don't communicate, they don't clear things up. On her 35th birthday, Lorelai finally pays the check back to her parents and she's like, thank God, I no longer owe them anything, because it's disempowering to her to feel like they have any kind of leverage or control over her. However, the minute that she pays them back, Emily gets so offended. She's like, oh, I see how it is. Now you've paid us back, I guess you're not going to be coming around for Friday night dinners anymore. Why is she angry? Lorelai just paid her back. What's the problem? The only way that she can get Lorelai is by trapping her into a relationship, and her overreaction and her storming off was even more silly considering it was Lorelai's birthday. Take a chill pill. And it's funny, I can barely think of any scenes where they just hung out and had fun without it escalating into an argument, which I don't know why I need to point this out to people, but that is unhealthy. She picks on every little thing Lorelai says, does, wears, and she makes everything into Lorelai's fault, which, I'm sorry, that's just not fair. She blames Lorelai for everything. She wants to fix the relationship. She knows it's bad, but she doesn't want to admit that she's playing a role, and so this extreme stubbornness and inability to admit wrongness makes it worse. I guess in society we've made it this taboo topic to talk about abusive mothers. Another reason I didn't like Emily in season 1 was how she loves to make a point that she's the better mother. Like, she's so vain. Get over it, sis. Stop. Every 2 seconds she's like, if Rory was my daughter, I would do things so differently. And often in the same scene, Emily will compliment Rory on how amazing she is, and then in the same breath insult Lorelai for being a disappointment. Emily couldn't accept it when Lorelai was dating Max. Then she couldn't accept it when Lorelai was dating Luke, because apparently Lorelai messes everything up. Also, every time she calls Lorelai, gets in contact with her, it's never to just say, how are you? How's my girl going? No, it's to say, oh, I need this for Rory, I need to buy this, can you come to this event? Are you free for dinner? Like, it's just to organize something. It's all very transactional. Lorelai gets this big news about her engagement and just doesn't want to share it with her mother because she's scared that her mother will find a way to ruin it for her and not share the happiness with her. Emily is devastated about this, and I felt kind of bad for Emily just because of how hurt she was, and she just doesn't understand why Lorelai doesn't want to include her in her life. She feels like she's owed information from Lorelai. Some things can be kept private. You don't have to share everything with your mum just because she's your mum. Sometimes it's nice to have some boundaries. Then when Emily finds out that the engagement is off, she doesn't offer emotional support, she doesn't offer sympathy, she's just like, okay, I'll just have to, I guess, return your wedding present because you won't be needing it. I always remember that spa episode with Lorelai and Emily too, because the whole thing is this forced hangout that Lorelai didn't want. Like, Emily basically invites herself and then organizes all these couple activities, so she's there in the room with Lorelai all the time, and Lorelai just can't get her to shut up or get rid of her. Again, breaching that boundary. Lorelai and Emily, for once, are actually having fun together. I think that's in the spa episode. They're just having such a good time, and it was so cute because there aren't often those moments where you see them just enjoying each other's company like a mother and daughter should be. But then Emily gets uncomfortable because this dude comes up to her and wants to dance. These feelings of discomfort are within her, but she projects them onto Lorelai and blames Lorelai because she can't handle and process her own emotional state. Now I want to talk about DAVO. Deny, attack, and then reverse victim and offender. That's what it stands for. And this is an actual thing. Many researchers indicate that it's a common manipulation strategy of psychological abusers. And unfortunately, I realized that Emily does this constantly. I wish I was exaggerating, but you could take basically any scene between Emily and Lorelai and you'll find elements of this in their conversation. Lorelai is upset about Emily icing Rory out. She says, that's not fair. You're doing to Rory what you always did to me. The stonewall, silent treatment.
You try to control her, and when that doesn't work, you just shut her out.
You totally annoyed Rory by ignoring what she wanted and inviting all these kids to her party who are horrible and bullies. She didn't want them there.
Well, I had to invite them. That's just good manners, something that your daughter is sorely lacking.
She's deflecting and then attacking Rory rather than apologizing. She makes herself into a victim, complains about how difficult it's been for her having to organize the party and why no one appreciates her.
I spent days planning it, making sure that every little detail was perfect. The food, the linen, the music, and I did all this for...
Then she starts ridiculing Lorelai. Oh, if I had $1 for every time you gave up. So again, Lorelai's feelings are being invalidated and ignored.
But you don't care what she needs.
How dare you?
In season 5, things still haven't really changed and she's making the same mistakes. Logan, Rory's boyfriend, comes over for dinner, and obviously this is the time for family. This was one of the scenes where I hated Emily the most because she's ridiculing, humiliating and mocking Lorelai for the entire dinner.
Grandma and Grandpa are very taken with Logan's lapels.
They look fine to me.
You'll have to excuse Lorelai, Logan. It takes a certain eye to be aware of this kind of thing.
Then she keeps interrupting Lorelai mid-sentence, and it's just disgusting. Lorelai talks to her parents and mentions how much it bothers her that Logan's family was really dismissive and disrespectful towards Rory, and they don't listen to her. They gaslight her, they ignore her, they dismiss everything she says, even though Lorelai is just telling the truth, and they're like, oh, you must have misunderstood, that can't be true. Then Emily is super disapproving over Luke and Lorelai's relationship, which she has no right to be because Luke was the first guy that like properly stood by Lorelai's side and made her happy. Now at least Richard wanted to include Luke in the family somewhat, like pushing Luke's career forward maybe and making him look more suitable for the family, getting Luke's diner turned into a chain. He was somewhat trying to accommodate Luke, but Emily was just very much like, this cannot go ahead. Emily then goes behind Lorelai's back to talk to Christopher and say that he needs to seduce Lorelai before she goes and marries Luke. Everything escalates at Emily and Richard's wedding when Lorelai says to her mum, we're done. And she tells her mum that on purpose, right before the family photograph is about to be taken, so that the moment would be captured forever and immortalized in a photograph. Then Emily totally gaslights Luke and Lorelai because she tries to fix the relationship as if nothing happened and get them back together, while disregarding the fact that she was the one who caused the problem and broke them up in the first place. So even though she comes to Luke and tries to get him back with Lorelai, girl, this was your fault. Maybe next time don't go around messing in your daughter's love life. Then Richard and Emily organize this party for Rory, and it's totally controlling and manipulative, and when she turns up it's just a bunch of eligible bachelors and guys, so it's effectively a mating ritual. And what's so gross is that, like, A, why? And B, Rory has a boyfriend at the time that she's really happy with. It's the same way they were trying to control Rory dating Dean earlier and saying he's not suitable for her and he's not good enough for her. They totally trick her. It's just really bad. Then Lorelai tries to talk to them afterwards, express her feelings, say, guys, that wasn't very nice of you, you shouldn't have done that. And again, they gaslight the shit out of her, stonewall her. Guess what, Lorelai? We don't want Rory to mess up her future and not find a high-flying guy in the same way that you did. And they just hang up on her. What the fuck? It's very lucky that when Rory was at the party, she ended up having a lot of fun, that all the guys were nice to her, that Logan was there and he was being an absolute babe and cheering her up. Because Rory has been so spoiled and mollycoddled by her grandparents and handed everything, she starts playing up. And Richard and Emily are actually really shocked that this is happening. They can't believe their eyes. Guess who they blame? Lorelai. They're completely gaslighting her. Lorelai had a whole conversation with them about how concerned she was about Rory's well-being, and they completely dismissed it. And now they're erasing history and rewriting the narrative to make Lorelai out to be the negligent, dismissive parent. They didn't listen to Lorelai when she came to them for help. They made their own decisions. They called her crazy and hysterical. They literally used that word, hysterical. But then, when things don't work out and they mess up, then they backtrack and act as if nothing happened. In season 6, Rory starts living with her grandparents, and I loved this subplot. I know a lot of people didn't, but I did, because you could see for once the tables turning and them no longer treating Rory like their golden child, because previously their relationship with Rory had been pretty solid and they did get along really well with her. It was always quite nice. But then in season 6, they're treating her like their little doll. And that's when the relationship properly falls apart, which hadn't really happened before. Normally the problems were strictly between Lorelai and Emily. But they start treating Rory badly too in season 6. They had an opportunity to be, I guess, better parent figures and have a do-over with Rory, and yet they still mess it up. For instance, Emily wants to talk to Rory. Rory doesn't really want to talk to her, and she's like, can you go away? And Emily just keeps insisting and insisting and insisting.
That's it. That's it.
What's it?
You're grounded.
Grounded.
Yes.
I'm 21, you can't ground me.
And no more sleepovers at Paris's house.
Then they threaten to throw out Rory's private address book. Her default mode, her knee-jerk response, is to be the aggressor. And she says to Rory, I don't know what's going on with you, but you're turning out more like your mother every single day. Then Rory says the incredible line, quite possibly my favorite line in the show, and you're becoming like my mother's mother more and more every day.
And you are becoming more like my mother's mother with every passing day.
She realizes how bad Emily and Richard are because her whole life she was told they were bad by Lorelai, but she always dismissed it. And a moment I really didn't like Rory actually was when she comes back to Lorelai and says, oh, you have no idea how awful it was for me living there with Emily and Richard, which is really narcissistic because of course Lorelai knows what it was like. She grew up there. It's just that Rory never really respected that or understood it, to be fair, because you kind of need to be in the person's shoes to get it. And also because, again, Emily and Richard had always been so nice to Rory that she thought, come on, my mum's being a bit harsh. They're not that bad if you just try to get along with them. Emily says, when your father gets home, we're going to talk about the house rules, which A, is patronizing, but B, that's a, what's it called, a Freudian slip? The fact that she, I hope I said that right, the fact that she called Rory her daughter, she's almost deluded herself into thinking that Rory could be the child she never got, that Rory could replace Lorelai. And she would have been happy if Rory didn't go back to Yale, as long as she could dress her up like her doll and take her to events. And as generous and sweet as it was for Richard and Emily to give Rory a place to stay, that doesn't give them a right to violate her boundaries just because she agreed to live with them. Clearly, so far, Emily hasn't improved much. Did things improve in season 7? Emily and Lorelai's relationship had improved a bit. They still have a very awkward relationship. Like, Emily doesn't really feel comfortable crying in front of Lorelai when Richard's in the hospital because she's so focused on appearances and maintaining that front. She also turns up to this event for Rory's uni, which was for parents, not grandparents. Then Richard, in like the finale, gives Lorelai a compliment and says how amazing she is, and Emily's kind of cutting him off and interrupting him, like she doesn't want to give Lorelai her time to shine. This may shock you. In the finale, Lorelai was actually happy to keep going back to Friday night dinners even though she had no incentive or obligation to. She went from not wanting any communication with her parents to being happy to have some communication with them, and I thought that was really nice. Also, there was this scene where I was actually really proud of Emily. It sounds so weird because I've just been ranting about how horrible she is for like the past God knows how long. Emily was really concerned about Lorelai's marriage to Christopher falling apart, which it was because it was a very impulsive marriage. So she came to talk to Lorelai about it and she's like, marriage is work. But the way she did it was actually, I thought, very respectful, and it sounded like it was coming from a place of genuine concern about Lorelai messing up her life. She has cared about Lorelai, it's just in her own messed up way. She wants things to be different with her and Lorelai. She wants them to get along, but she just doesn't know how to fix it. That's why she sometimes ices Lorelai out, because she knows she's in the wrong, but she just refuses to do the work she needs to do to be worthy of having that relationship with her. Sometimes Emily appears cold and emotionless or even snappy, but it's often those people that seem not to care that actually care the most and are very emotional people, but it's just that they suppress and bury so much and then they just kind of explode because they've been taught to hide their feelings or been taught that sensitivity is weak, like Emily was. There's a couple of scenes where you see Emily crying in private, which shows that actually she does have a heart. She's not a monster. She just doesn't know how to show it. As discussed, Emily is the perpetrator. She is the one messing up and instigating problems in the relationship. However, sometimes I felt like Lorelai enjoyed almost stirring the pot and causing drama when it wasn't really necessary. And at one point she was interviewed about her business skills and her owning the inn, and she kind of made a few digs at her mum and called her names. That was so awkward, and I think unfortunately right afterwards she realized it was a terrible idea in case that section actually got published. The reason why I think Emily is such an excellent character is because we get to see those more vulnerable sides of her as well, not just the mean sides. And we understand why Emily is the way she is and her motivations, which was also really excellent. For example, we know that her entire purpose revolves around this fancy lifestyle she has, and so when Lorelai ran away from home, that was like Lorelai rejecting every single thing that's important to Emily. And maybe you could argue that Emily herself was an intelligent, witty woman who undermined her own potential by just getting married and settling down and not pursuing her own career, and her whole life is basically firing maids and choosing the nicest tablecloths, and maybe she's bored and lacks a sense of purpose. But if that's the case, then it's even more hypocritical and mean for her to say she's ashamed of Lorelai for throwing away her future when Emily has effectively done the same thing. Kelly Bishop, the woman who plays Emily, her acting is amazing. She fully encapsulates her sadness that things can't be different between her and Lorelai, and her harshness, but just all of it together. A few nice gestures, a few moments of selflessness. It doesn't compensate or undo years of mistreatment, years of harshness, and their love is very much conditional. You don't need to hate someone to hurt them. You can love them and still be the most unhealthy person in their life. This was really highlighted to me in the reboot, where people thought that everything was fine and everything was fixed just because Emily became a better person in the reboot, the revival, sorry, which she does. She's suddenly more nice to the maids and the help, which is like unheard of for Emily. And after Richard's death, Emily is forced to become her own person. She's forced to grow and rediscover who she is. Honestly, she was forced to develop, and maybe they weren't going to, but they realized they had to because the actor who played her husband died. So maybe they were like, shit, what do we do with Emily? Even though Emily makes some progress, again, that doesn't erase the damage done in the original show. Does Gilmore Girls understand that Emily is toxic and abusive? Yeah, I think so. And it's also clear with a lot of other characters' reactions to Emily and them being scared of her that the show knows she's not a good person. Emily was very realistic. She wasn't the worst person ever, but she was deeply flawed. That makes her a really good character. How can you praise Rory and just think she's the shit and then criticize her mother when Lorelai is the one who raised her? Abusing someone or being mean to someone, bullying them, it's not about what their intentions are or how they feel. It's not about the intent, it's about the outcome and the consequence and how it made you feel. That's what defines what abuse is and what bullying is. And people tend to present it like this mutually damaging relationship, like Lorelai's as much in the wrong as her parents are. Emily and Richard just did their best, but Lorelai misunderstood their intentions and she was just really whiny and spoilt, and I just couldn't disagree more. Lorelai is an adult when the show takes place, so people are considering them equals. Like, they're adults, Lorelai's an adult, but the power dynamic between a parent and their child will never be equal because they raised Lorelai, and as much as she's an adult now and is responsible for her own decisions, you can't ignore the bigger dynamics at play here. Another big defense people have who are fans of Emily is that she's a great character because she's really witty and funny, and I don't really understand that. Like, occasionally Gilmore Girls has some fun humor, but a lot of the time I think we're meant to take Emily's behavior seriously. And a good contrast to this is Penny, Miranda's mother, in that show Miranda on the BBC, which I was obsessed with when I was younger. But Miranda's mum Penny is very similar in many ways to Emily. She's overbearing, she's controlling, and she's really rude to Miranda, and yet it's played for laughs and done like in a very comedic way that's actually quite effective, even though we're aware that she's a toxic mother. And that was handled in a funny way, right? But just Emily isn't a funny character. She has her moments, but I don't think we should just laugh at what she does and pretend it's not a big deal. It's interesting because the actress, Kelly Bishop, hates the character of Emily as much as I do. She admits she's been baffled and always has been by fans' affection for her character. She says, "I've always enjoyed playing what I call the rich, nasty woman because I can't stand them." Yeah, it's just funny to me that so many fans watching the show want to blame Lorelai. Now, I'm not a Lorelai lover or anything like that, but I just think that it's kind of harsh to victim blame. Emily's an excellently written character and the show wouldn't be the same without her. But moving on now, let's talk about Richard. Obviously he was married to Emily, but yet a lot of the focus seems to go onto Emily. But was Richard involved, or was he just ignorant? He can't be completely oblivious to what's going on unless he's the stupidest man on earth. He was always really nice to Rory, and you could see his soft sides come through with her. Like in season 1 when they first meet, they're super awkward around each other and they don't know what to say, but then they end up bonding over books and actually having a really nice thing going on. When she dropped out of Yale, he thought it was just a phase at first, but then he properly started to freak out when she wasn't applying herself, and he was like, oh my god, something's wrong with Rory. And also that prank he played on Logan was so funny. Like it's one of my favorite scenes in the whole series. So like he's not all bad, neither's Emily, but he always valued taking his wife's side over his daughter's side, and in this sense he is an enabling parent. He stands back and lets Emily do all the dirty work and say all the nasty things, but if you're allowing it to happen, then you're part of the problem. He was also very emotionally unavailable and very quick to start snapping at her. Now, to be fair, he definitely acknowledged how hard Lorelai worked, way more than Emily ever did. He was much more encouraging and he really appreciated her business skills. But Richard was a far better grandfather to Rory and a far better husband to Emily than he was a father. Now, in some senses, I understand why Richard and Emily were disappointed in Lorelai. They had all these hopes for her, all these dreams, and then she goes behind their back, dates this guy, gets pregnant, doesn't get married to him, runs away from home. Like, yeah, the whole thing's a complete shambles and they would feel really let down. I respect that. It really upsets me when the entire blame for the failing of the relationship is placed on Lorelai. That's just not fair on her. She was a child. And Richard and Emily so often just don't even try to understand things from Lorelai's point of view. Yes, Lorelai pushed them away. Can you blame her? She just wanted to move on with her life and make other friends and forget about that whole messy chapter of her life, and good for her, honestly. Did Richard have his good moments? Yes, of course. He was a loving son to his mum. He and Emily make a lot of sense as a couple and they can be super funny and great together. But he could also be a pretty bad husband sometimes, and we saw it from how he just would do his own thing, like how he was having lunch with this woman once a year and just never told Emily about it, which was really weird, and how often his mother would just bully Emily and make fun of her and criticize her, and Richard would just sit back and watch and let it happen like a mama's boy. Although he seemed proud of his wife Emily, he was also ashamed of her in a way because he didn't want Rory to end up like her, just hosting events and parties. But I love them because they're complex characters, they're well-rounded, and honestly, that's what makes this show so interesting and why I really enjoyed watching it and why I'm so glad you guys recommended it to me. So now we've kind of established in detail who Lorelai's parents are and how she was raised, her environment. We now need to take a look at Lorelai, who is, I would say, the main character in the show along with Rory. Sorry, by the way, if you can hear any background noise, it's just really loud wind. Now, Lorelai is an excellent character because of the sheer amount of time we spend on her. The amount of times we just hear her ramble and talk, we really get to know her over the course of the 7 seasons. I'm gonna save an entire video for Lorelai covering things I don't get to talk about in this section because honestly I've got too much to say, but I just don't want this video to be too long. Why does Lorelai seem so childlike? This is something a lot of people point out when they say they don't like Lorelai, because she behaves like a little kid. She's acting as if she's constantly on a sugar high. She's not calm, she's always fidgeting, always talking, always on the move. It does get really annoying when she just goes off on a random tangent for like 10 minutes about something no one cares about, but again, I think this is intentional to show that she's always on defense mode. So her coping mechanism is humor.
And now she's dropped out of Yale, but between the 3 of us, we can knock some sense into her. Of course we'll help you. This is not happening. I'll call Charlie Davenport tomorrow. Thank you guys so much. Just thank you and scene.
She raised Rory alone, which must have been hard because she felt like she had no other option. Her parents always want to know what's going on and expect to be involved in her life, but then shame her when they're involved in her life. And Lorelai has very few happy memories of her father, which tells me that he was just not really present. You can't ignore the whole history of the way she was raised and how that's shaped her.
Ugh, I can't believe what I'm hearing.
If we'd known the extent of the issue, we might not have taken Rory in.
I tried to tell you.
You did not.
I came here there and I told you exactly what happened with Mitchum and you didn't want to hear it.
I don't remember that.
I don't either.
She has a wounded inner child and she's still mentally stunted and stuck at the age of 16 due to her trauma, because often it freezes you at the age you were at when the trauma occurred if you don't go to therapy, if you don't heal it. For example, Emily and Richard host a wedding vow renewal ceremony they spent hours planning. The night before the ceremony, Lorelai takes the wedding planner's binder containing seating arrangements, and then she basically rearranges the seating plans based on which guests don't like each other or have this history, so it will be as awkward and hilarious as possible. But she does this like for her own entertainment. She thinks it's funny. Some people don't like Lorelai because they say that she's just too flawed and selfish to be likable. Now, is that true? Because she does mess up over the course of the series. For example, at this whole, was it a baby shower? Rory and Lorelai start having a fight in the middle of the baptism and they cause this huge scene. And then they go outside to continue arguing while holding the babies, which obviously means the whole venue is just on hold for them, which again is so selfish, but Lorelai doesn't seem to realize because she's too busy thinking about herself. She also doesn't respect Rory's boyfriends, which again is selfish because she's not thinking about Rory's needs and how that would affect Rory, feeling like her mum is continually disappointed in her choice of boyfriend. Whenever Lorelai like has a big fight with someone, like for instance Rory and Emily, she does the same thing to both of them where she just ices them out, cuts them out of her life. When you look at the way she runs away from commitment and relationships when it gets too good or serious, she often makes impulsive decisions that have negative consequences, like she breaks up with someone and then immediately goes and sleeps with Christopher, proposes to Luke so they can elope without thinking about why she's doing it, the way she rushes into marrying Christopher, the way she rushed into getting engaged to Max. But this is, I think, a manifestation of trauma, and we see her mature as an adult, learning lessons that maybe she should have learned at 16 but didn't get the chance to. And instead she put her focus into her new life of Stars Hollow. She's a giving member of the community, she's involved in the events, she has friends there, she has a found family in Stars Hollow. She can be so funny, especially in seasons 1 to 2. I swear some of her one-liners are just beyond funny, like they're so good. And she tries to give Rory the love that she never got, the support that she never got, especially as a single mum, which is really hard. I think she did a good job. I'm being serious. She tried. Was she the best mother in the world? No, like she messed up so many times, but she really tried. But when it came to Rory being like a teenager and a young adult, I don't think she knew how to handle it. She was too nice and she didn't know how to say no to Rory often enough. Like she was a bit of a pushover, and I think that's where the issues came in. And also she was protecting Rory way too much, and so as a result Rory often takes advantage of their relationship, and she gets all like sassy with her mum when she gets older. Around season 4 she'll like roll her eyes and stuff because she views her mum as like a friend, not someone who has any kind of discipline over her. Their relationship was actually codependent and could be quite unhealthy. Rory is defended way too much by her mum, and also Lorelai, despite being loving, was also just too harsh and imposing with her opinions on Rory, so Rory couldn't learn to think for herself. Dean even points this out in the Donna Reed episode. He says, "You just feel that way because your mother feels that way," and honestly he wasn't that far off. And without Rory there, Lorelai doesn't know who she is. For example, when Rory and Lorelai had a really big fight, that same night Lorelai impulsively proposes to Luke because she's trying to fill that void, that emptiness without Rory there. Then she buys a dog because the house feels too empty without Rory. Then Rory can't handle the thought of being away from her mum at uni, even though like it's not that big a deal, they're still in the same country. Maybe that's why Lorelai never liked any of Rory's boyfriends, because she doesn't like the idea of someone taking Rory away from her, which is kind of messed up. This is the problem with their whole we're best friends first thing, because that's just not the way it should be. She should be a mum, not a best friend. There is a difference. Rory then gets the idea in her head that she has the authority to set rules and terms, and she just shouldn't. Despite their issues, Lorelai really loves Rory. She wanted her to succeed. That's got to count for something. You know, they had a lot of fun. They enjoy each other's company. In the article Bon Voyage by Catherine Wright, she talked about the finale and said it really highlighted the strength of the relationship between Rory and Lorelai, because the Gilmore Girls say goodbye to each other as they prepare for Rory's departure, and the pain of their separation bleeds through all of their fast-paced dialogue. Lorelai's grief culminates in a scene without dialogue, a rarity in Gilmore Girls where linguistic dexterity and clever comebacks are the norm. Lorelai pulls the covers over Rory's shoulders while her daughter sleeps. The camera zooms in on Lorelai and she begins to cry. The characters have so much to say but can come to an understanding without the need for words. I want to talk about her psychology, her behavior in relationships, and again, just subscribe for that, that's coming soon. But now I want to move on and talk about food and how it ties into the trope of the cool girl. I have so much to say about this. This is seriously dangerous stuff. Food defines the moral center of the show. It reveals the characters' relationships, their mindsets. It's used to bring people together. It's used to show peace offerings between characters, and it communicates the overall theme of each episode sometimes. For Emily and Richard, food is a delicacy. You need freshly baked stuff, 3-course meals. It's a way of showing your money and your privilege. Maybe that's why Lorelai's diet is so disgustingly unhealthy, as a way of saying fuck you to her parents, like screw you, I'll eat whatever I want, you can't stop me. It's an act of rebellion, and again shows how she is very childlike, because it's the sort of food that a teenager would eat the minute their parents leave the house.
How are we going to eat 4 Thanksgiving dinners?
How? What are we if not world champion eaters?
It's too much food.
It's not too much food. This is what we've been training for our whole lives. This is our destiny.
And as for Luke, food shows the contradiction of his character, because from the outside his diner looks cheap and greasy. It's even called Luke's Diner, which just sounds a bit but then when you go in and eat the food, it's really good, and he actually puts a lot of thought into his menu, and he's a total health nut and bakes a lot of fresh stuff, which I guess symbolizes how on the outside his character seems gruff and tough and kind of cold, but then he's actually a big softie on the inside. When Lane is trying to escape her mum's tofu and restrictive snacks, she often sneaks Snicker bars from Rory, and it's her way of rebelling against her mum. As for Suki and her husband, you know that they're finally in a good place in their relationship when they're having silly little arguments about food and what to bake. It shows they're on the same page, and food is like their love language. It's a way for characters to show their love, profess their love. For instance, when Lorelai was having a bad day, Luke makes her this like Christmas special treat snowman, and food is a way that Lorelai and Rory show love to each other. For instance, on Lorelai's birthday, Rory gets her this massive cake, and then she commissions the world's largest pizza. But food is more than just this symbolic thing. It's featured so regularly on the show that it's a fixation. Now, in some ways, the Gilmore Girls are inspiring. Could you say that their relationship with food is good? Hunger is not something they're scared of. Hunger is not something to suppress. It's something they listen to. They order huge amounts of takeaway food, and when they're celebrating, they might get like a gigantic tub of biscuits and popcorn and noodles. They don't treat themselves and then burn it off afterwards or punish themselves the next day. They just enjoy it. They have this food freedom. They give them permission to eat, permission to have what their body craves. Also, the use of junk food shows that they're more sisterly than mother-daughter. It's one of the things that makes her seem not really mature, because something a proper adult does is cook nourishing food and snacks for their kids. You don't just order takeaway every night, but that's what Lorelai does. She's incapable of pulling a good meal together, and her fridge is always empty. She's not fully stocked for guests when they arrive. There's also a really strong link between socializing and eating in the show. If Lorelai's by herself, she's not eating a 3-course meal. She might be snacking on some lettuce or a bag of crisps. Is this actually unhealthy? Because Rory and her mum make fun of fat people who can't just effortlessly stay in shape, and they're even doing this in the revival. And it's not healthy to say always that you hate vegetables, to only eat this massive pizza and noodles without any salad. A weird thing to put on a show where the main viewers are female, to be like, oh my god, something green, how gross. The girls are always hungry, never satisfied. They eat so much their boyfriends say, you eat more than us, how are you still hungry? You're like this endless pit of hunger. The girls also have a serious coffee addiction with multiple coffees a day. I don't understand. I think that's so weird. Is coffee an appetite suppressant? How can they have that much coffee and still be hungry as well? Like, I don't know. They're eating out so much at Luke's Diner. Bagels, donuts, spending money on this takeaway food. How could that not result in weight gain? This ties into my next point, which is, are Rory and Lorelai actually cool girls, and not in a good way?
Who needs more? I do.
Wow, you can eat.
Yes, I can. Oh, that's bad, isn't it?
No, most girls don't eat. It's good you eat.
I'm all for it.
The first time I heard the phrase was in the incredible movie Gone Girl, and it comes from the iconic character of Amy, who says, "Nick never loved me. He loved a girl who doesn't exist, a girl I was pretending to be. The cool girl." Men always use that as a defining compliment, right? She's a cool girl. I ate cold pizza and remained a size 2, but then I had to stop because it wasn't me. I hated Nick for being surprised when I became me. So this is like a big saying now, and a lot of people labeled Jennifer Lawrence the symbol of the cool girl because of the way that she appeared to the media and just a few moments that were captured that together make it look like this. For instance, how she talks about food a lot, her apparently voracious appetite, the fact that she swears sometimes, she tripped over at the Oscars, she's a lot of fun, and she does all this while looking absolutely stunning. The idea of the cool girl is that they don't have to worry about the things that normal girls worry about, like staying in shape and doing their makeup, but also they have the privilege of looking as beautiful as like the most stunning woman you can imagine, but also they're like one of the guys. They get along with the bros. So they don't like intimidate the guys or make them uncomfortable by appearing too feminine, because society seems to just really hate anything feminine at this point. But is this actually cool? Where you need to like look sexy but not look like you've tried, where you need to eat whatever you want but still look good? Unfortunately, Rory and Lorelai fit this. It's crazy that they don't gain weight considering what they're eating, and they don't even know what's going into half the food they're eating. Often they even eat in front of the TV, so they would not be noticing like their intuitive fullness half as well. Like it's just shown, like when you eat in front of the TV constantly, you might end up gaining some weight. Not for everyone, but for a lot of people. The food's treated as all the same, as having absolutely no impact on their bodies. They don't get bloated, like nothing, they're fine. As Lorelai enjoys her omelette, Michelle says, "I can't eat like that and look like her." Then Lorelai says, "Oh, come and have an omelette, you're missing out." And he says, "That will kill you. Someday all of this will catch up with you." And that's what everyone always says, but yet nothing. And it makes it worse when you realize that the actress who plays Rory, Alexis Bledel, she actually has like a really healthy organic diet and has a pretty like balanced meals. She cooks a lot, and the actress who plays Lorelai has actually been on a strict restrictive diet since she was a kid and struggled with staying slim, and that's been an ongoing issue for her. It's not like the actresses eat like this on set every day. Like if they did, then props to them, but like they don't eat all that every day. And to be fair, Rory's meant to be a teenager, and it is easier for teenagers to stay slim, so you could use that argument, but you can't apply that same logic to Lorelai. The only thing I can think of that makes it make sense is that they have tricked themselves into thinking they eat way more than they do, and they actually just pick at it, and they're those annoying people that go around saying they eat loads when they actually don't. The show doesn't really make that clear, so that doesn't seem to work. And the excuse they keep using is that they have freakishly fast metabolisms, but like, come on. Past season 2, the girls aren't actually eating anymore, just fiddling with the food, holding it up to their mouth and then getting up and leaving the scene to do something else with the food still there. So it gives the impression that they haven't actually eaten anything at all. This strongly reminds me of Desperate Housewives, which I've talked about in detail on my channel before, because they're all so skinny, especially like in the earlier seasons, but Susan's thinness is explained by her having a fast metabolism, and all these women look healthy and fit, yet we barely see them exercising. Lynette only jogs like once because apparently she doesn't have time. Brie looks amazing, yet she's always in the kitchen baking and cooking and apparently not really exercising. We never see her exercising, yet she's staying really skinny, and it's like, how? The only one I remember seeing exercising regularly was, at least more regularly, was Gabby, so I can buy that, but everyone else, like, no. But what is the effect of this? Could you argue it's just a show and it doesn't matter? Well, in the article, and this is a long one, so prepare yourself, An Idiopathic Dalliance in Television, Parasocial Relationships and Consumption, a study of pop culture, television, nutrition, and the bandwagon effect, talked about shows like Gilmore Girls specifically, which have bad consequences for the viewer and audience's relationship with food, as we are too regularly watching these characters basically pig out on all this junk food. without any salad or anything like fresh and no vegetables. And it has consequences because we have a strong emotional investment and attachment to the characters. So we kind of want to sympathy eat with them. We want to start eating more of what they're eating. And it's a form of cognitive bias called the bandwagon effect, where we kind of want to join in. And as humans, we're very social, tribal creatures. We want to be included. Food just isn't about calories and fuel. It's about social time and connection and making memories. That's one of the great things about food. But the problem is, because of this very strong parasocial bond we form with the characters, where we feel like we know them even though they don't know us, we kind of want to share some of their food habits. And so the article argued that this normalization and even glorification of these food habits perpetuates unhealthy dietary habits. On episode 14 of season 1, Michelle asks Suki to prepare him an egg white omelette. She gives him a 3-egg omelette with goat cheese, and he refuses to eat it because he's so terrified about gaining weight. And his character throughout the show is always watching his weight and scared about not staying slim. In season 2, Suki, knowing that he has these dietary restrictions, hands him a plate of low-fat whole wheat blueberry pancakes, and he says, wait, no, I can't eat this. I need to know how many blueberries are in there because I can't eat any more than 12 blueberries a day. And he's often seen weighing his food and exercising to burn off what he's eaten, and everyone jokes about it, but it's actually not that funny. So yeah, the show did end up promoting some extremely bizarre ideas about eating and body image. On a deeper note, why does food in the show matter so much? Because food is just so important and symbolic, and this was talked a lot about in Gregory Stevenson's piece called Dining with the Gilmores, which was an excellent article. So I'm just going to quote some of what he talked about because he just worded it better than I can. He said, scenes involving food that occur near the beginnings of episodes often set up events that develop later in the episode. For example, Lorelai's tasting cake samples for her and Max's wedding. Fran lectures her about the importance of choosing the right cake. By the end of the episode, Lorelai had broken off her engagement, determining that Max was just not the right piece of cake for her. One Stars Hollow fundraiser called for bids on picnic baskets, where the meal was to be shared between the bidder and the basket maker. Jess outbid Dean for Rory's basket, which means he'll have to share a meal with Rory, and the subsequent meal between Jess and Rory underscored the uncertainty in their relationship and the uncertainty contained in any romantic triangle. Luke bid on Lorelai's basket, and they shared an awkward meal which hinted, was it a friendship or are they something more? Although Emily's default mode is selfish ambition, occasionally she attempts to put Lorelai and Rory above herself. On Friday night dinner, in honor of Rory, Emily abandoned her typical highbrow meals and served Rory's favorite foods, and she serves pudding to a stunned Lorelai. Now, this was her way of trying to be kind, and of course you can buy pudding, but you can't buy what the pudding symbolizes. In season 4, Lorelai drags Emily to a food mall court, but Emily just isn't enjoying herself and finds it low class. She's kind of a downer, and then later she's upset that her and Lorelai don't get along, not realizing that the issue was caused by this snobby behavior. Later, the episode cuts and alternates between 2 dining scenes. Emily and Richard sitting opposite each other, having this fancy meal but barely speaking. And then Lorelai and Rory, who are eating pie and talking and bonding over food. But now we've talked about that, this is probably the section of the video you've all been waiting for. Also, I just want to stand up and show you guys my outfit today because it's really cute. It's like this Rory Gilmore inspired 2-piece, which I think really suits the show. Before we get into it, I just want us to have a quick interval, just a little break. So grab yourself a snack, grab yourself some tea, and then we'll get into it. Rory Gilmore. Rory is one of the most disliked characters in the show. I have defended her a lot, and I've tried to remind people that she's just a teenager when the show starts. But like, as the show went on, especially as she started getting older, you need to start taking responsibility at some point. You know how people enjoy watching women have a downfall? Like, people enjoyed watching Amanda Bynes go crazy and all the tabloids were just soaking it up. Like, we love to watch a beautiful, successful woman crumble because I guess we're bitter. Like, it's not nice. It's a really ugly side of the media. But when it came to Rory, do people have a point when they say that her character actually suffered? To start, we need some backstory. Rory was raised by a single mum, Lorelai, and even though she didn't have a stable father figure in the show, she kind of has 3 main father symbols. That's Christopher, Luke, and Richard. So each man gives her some new insight and she can take something away from each of them. What Rory has always truly wanted was never to leave Stars Hollow, and she's always expressing this homesickness and longing to be home with the town. And so every accomplishment that should bring her away ends up bringing her back to Stars Hollow. Like, she was meant to go further away, but ends up going to Yale, which is closer to her hometown. She was meant to go off with Logan at the end of the show, but she doesn't. So it's funny, she can never really get away from the town. And maybe that's because she has like so much attachment to people like Luke and her friends who've just been there for her, and the whole community that was effectively like an extended family and raised her. In terms of her father figures, she has a very, I guess, intellectual connection with Richard. Like, she'll often talk about reading with him, magazines, and one thing Richard was always good at was, of course, actually giving money and being helpful in that sense, because he had the ability to be. As for Luke, he practically raised Rory. I mean, she sees him every day, he's always there, and he's there for her, he supports her, he's protective and kind, and he says that he cares about Rory even more than he cares about himself. And he loves her mum Lorelai, so in a way they're like a little family, even before he officially got with Lorelai. However, he shows his love through actions and gestures, not so much words, because Luke isn't really a talker. Luke's loyalties feel divided between Rory and her mum. Like, he doesn't want to take sides, but sometimes they want him to take a side. And obviously the final dad figure is the biological bloodline dad, which is Christopher, and he's more of like the idealized fantasy of what Rory wishes her dad could be, but the reality is far more unpleasant because he's absent so often and didn't see her grow up, which is like terrible. When Logan, Rory's boyfriend, meets Christopher, they hit it off immediately, and Christopher's like, I like this guy, which I guess was the show's way of implying that Logan is a lot like Christopher, or maybe that he can't be trusted because he's unreliable. I don't know, but I don't really buy that because Logan is so not like Christopher. You can't even compare because he was actually present. Sometimes Christopher wanted to be there, he wanted to be involved, but then there was always this obstacle coming up, like Sherry getting pregnant, and he went away again. And although he feels like he owes Rory being there and he feels responsible for her, he's not consistent. There were a few times that he bailed on her when she really needed him, and he gave her a lot of insecurities about men and commitment that just can't be undone. Luckily, she had the whole community of Stars Hollow there showing their support, being there for her, but maybe that was part of the problem because everyone was like, oh my god, Rory's so amazing. Rory's grandparents tend to idolize Rory, and so it makes her put this pressure on herself to be perfect, which means that when she makes a mistake, she doesn't want to own up to it because that would mean admitting she's not perfect. Rory is an inspirational character in the beginning of the show because she's so passionate about her career and her schoolwork. Her reading habits say a lot about her. Like, when she first meets Dean, she doesn't even notice him because she's so absorbed in her book, which shows that no man can get in the way of her career and her goals. You can see that her and Dean are incompatible earlier on because they're not really like resonating with some of the books they're recommending to each other. And also you can see how different it was with Jess because they actually like resonated and vibed with each other based on their love for literature. Obviously she wants to be a journalist, and yet so often when she's getting out there in the real world, she's sheltering herself by bringing her books to parties and kind of being introverted in that sense. Or when she and Paris were on summer break, everyone's out there partying, she should be getting out there and meeting people, and instead she just wants to stay in and read books and watch a movie. But from a young age, her goals are so clear-cut, too clear-cut maybe. It was too much pressure, but she knows what she wants to be and who she wants to be and how she's gonna do it because she's a career bitch. But then when things don't go to plan, when she gets the tiniest bit of criticism, what happens? She crumbles and burns. And then, in fact, she burns out and loses her motivation for academia, her love for reading and everything altogether. And when her idol Mitchum's like, I don't think you can be a journalist, you're not very good at this. And to be fair, the way he said it was mean. He could have worded it more nicely, but you need to pick yourself back up again. Rory didn't prove him wrong. The minute that Richard worries for Rory's future is when he asks her what reading she's done for Yale, and she tells him she hasn't read anything, and he's like, holy moly, what happened to you? It's funny as well to me that Rory was so set on going to Harvard or Yale instead of schools that are well known for their journalism program. Like, you should pick the uni based on which one offers the best course. You shouldn't go somewhere just because you think it's the most flashy or the most prestigious. Maybe Rory should have considered that journalism wasn't the best career path for her, but she doesn't want to admit that either, and in that sense, she's very stubborn like her grandparents. And her sensitivity around her academia, her dropping out of Yale for a while, being unmotivated, her, as she's an adult, not trying and falling asleep in job interviews or whatever, not preparing for interviews. It's not like this is just an issue related to her academia. There were always signs that Rory was privileged. This isn't like this new evolution. Like, it was happening right from the beginning. Like, when Rory didn't set her alarm properly in season 1 and she was late to this test, she throws this hissy fit in front of the teacher like, it's not fair. And it's like, girl, if you fucked up and you didn't set your alarm on time, then that's on you. But she thinks she deserves special treatment. You could see that in the way that she was leading Jess and Dean on in season 2, and she was considering them her options. Who will I choose? Which shows her selfishness. She's not considering they have feelings and they both want her, and she should just pick. She's kind of enjoying entertaining the idea of both of them. And this is like in season 2, like these issues were there from the beginning, and it started the moment she got involved with her grandparents. But even before then, this was forming in her childhood with the way that her mum and Stars Hollow idolized her and also like wouldn't teach her to work on herself. It was more like, you don't need to work on yourself, you're already perfect. Things really come to a head. She cheats, she sleeps with a married man, she doesn't take accountability, she then shames the wife, and the fallout was huge. Now, this may be an unpopular opinion, I know it's my toxic trait, I'm not ashamed of it, but I enjoyed it thoroughly. I enjoyed watching Rory crash and burn for a little bit and then pick herself up by the finale because it was juicy, it was fun. I felt like she was so boring before that. I just wanted to see her do something fun. And you know, it's like watching a car crash. You can't quite look away even though you know you should. And it was like, oh my God, like it was exciting. And seeing Rory like feud with her mom, like I ate that up. I'm not ashamed to admit it. At least I'm self-aware, right? It was so juicy. It was like watching a soap opera. And when she was fighting with her grandparents in season 6 and talking back to them, I was like, oh my God. Because like she never spoke back to them. I never seen that side of Rory. Like when she says to her grandma, you're becoming more like my mother's mother every day. I was like, oh, burn, it's so good. And again, I was kind of okay with it because she was a teenager making mistakes. No teenager handles relationships particularly maturely. I only started properly disliking her in the revival, but that's because she was a grown adult and I felt like she should have grown by then. So most of my problems with Rory came about in the revival, and the problem was that the writers were acting as if there'd be no time jump and we're just going back to Rory at the age of 20, but she's like 32.
Sorry, could write about something else.
No.
Write about your relationships, you and Jess, you and Dean.
Not fair.
It's my life, Rory. I went to all this effort for many, many years, making sure that people only knew what I wanted them to know, and now you're gonna lay it all out in a book?
It looks really bad for her character to still be in her 20-year-old mindset without having grown at all. She's still being the other woman for her romantic interests. She's not trying, she's not applying herself. And when she has opportunities to maybe work her way up in the industry, she's like, I'm too good for that. I just want to get to the top right away because I'm the Rory Gilmore.
No.
I'm sorry, I have to. Without this, it's grad school or groveling for jobs that I don't want.
Find another subject.
And it's really unattractive. She's got a boyfriend she treats like shit and just can't be bothered to break up with, which is very reminiscent of season 2 Rory. And also what was unrealistic was her ability to just cruise from place to place, living at her friend's house or her mum's place without really any concrete job. But yet she still has enough money, she can still pay for flights and it's okay. We all know like how much stigma there is around being a writer, because not even stigma, it's just bloody difficult. Like not everyone's going to be the next J.K. Rowling. Most of us have to scrape by. So seeing Rory just cruising through life probably triggered a lot of people watching the show who are writers or aspiring writers. I'm gonna probably give the revival its own video, to be honest, because I feel like there's more I need to say on this. But through Rory's character, there's also a big problem of shaming women for their sexuality and their sexual decisions, which ties into my next question: is this a feminist show? There is a direct correlation in this show between academic failure and boys. You can't miss it. And if you think I'm just making a sweeping statement, my findings may intrigue you. For instance, let's start with Lorelai. Her unexpected pregnancy completely derails her academic future and means that she can't keep going to school. Of course, being sexually active doesn't completely ruin these women's chances of having a career, but it plays a role in them failing in any way. For instance, this starts in season 1 where dating Dean is a distraction. Rory knew that it was all set for her to go to Chilton and she'd always wanted it, but she suddenly changes her mind after meeting Dean, and she wants to stay at Stars Hollow School to be with him. And her reasons include the bus ride to and from Hartford is like 30 minutes each way. I don't think we should be spending that money right now for Chilton. Excuse. But eventually we get to the bottom of it, which is that she is considering giving up this huge opportunity for a boy because she wants to spend more time with him and see him again, even though he's not even her boyfriend. Rory is shamed for her relationship with Dean because Lorelai thinks that they had sex and Rory's insisting that they didn't, which they didn't, but she's being shamed for it anyway. In season 5, Rory's grandparents shame her for sleeping with Logan, and they are appalled that she and Logan would be doing that, and then of course judge Lorelai's parenting. Shocker. I mean, they've just got to stick up both their asses, don't they? She's like 21. She has a boyfriend she's been with for like a year and she slept with him? God forbid. I mean, who would have thought? And then when Rory has sex with Dean in season 4 and later Logan in season 5, it's around that time that she starts losing interest in her academic endeavors. That's when she begins her downward spiral, dropping out of Yale and not reading, and where it takes a while to pick herself back up again. At the end of the series, Rory actually has to break off her relationship with Logan in order to follow her lifelong dream of becoming a journalist and getting this career opportunity. She's choosing self-sufficiency, independence, being a strong, independent woman, and she's choosing that over being with him, over staying with him. And that to me sends a really ugly message. It's like the show saying that you can't be a career woman and a wife at the same time. You have to pick one or the other. And so they're saying it's like this feminist move, but to me the most disempowering thing is this idea that it makes you weak to want love or to want a boyfriend. And I think you should be rewarded in your career regardless of if you want a boyfriend or not. So this ties into the question, is the show setting a good example for young girls? Is it a good influence for young girls then? Because this subliminal message probably isn't the best. I think there are so many things about the show that are really empowering, but there were also some less empowering or outdated moments. Every time this new woman comes in that could be a threat to Lorelai or Rory because they're more beautiful, they're smarter, that female character is so demonized, especially Lindsay. She was just treated like shit for the whole show. Lorelai or Rory can't then establish a good relationship with them. They can't like them. It's always comparing themselves to them, bringing them down, making fun of them, or treating the girl character like they're a bimbo, especially if the girl's blonde. She's seen as like stupid. And this kind of reflects that the show was like in the early 2000s when the media did love to make fun of blondes and say like blondes have more fun. So when Rachel is introduced, she's an immediate threat to Lorelai and Luke, and it's highlighted by the fact that people keep drawing comparisons between the two women and saying that they look kind of similar, as in Luke's got a type because he secretly wants Lorelai more and he's only dating Rachel to like get over how upset he is about Lorelai. Marty, this guy, is obsessed with Rory and she rejects him, and later Marty seems to finally be happy with his life and he moves on and starts dating Lucy. But then it's revealed that he just can't quite commit to Lucy because he's still in love with Rory and has been this entire time, even though they've literally not spoken, which seems a little bit unrealistic. Don't mind me. I just put a headband on. Let's just pretend it's been here the whole time. Lorelai and Rory don't really feel comfortable being friends with girls of a higher status. Like, they don't have many beautiful, successful, smart friends like who have all of those things. For instance, Rory's friends with Paris, but Paris is very insecure about her looks. She's smart, but she doesn't really threaten Rory in other aspects. And Suki is Lorelai's friend, but again, like, she's never really been a threat in terms of Lorelai's dating life. And all of the other girls that Rory's boyfriends have dated in the past aren't ever made someone you can be friends with, someone you can like. They're always the enemy. They're annoying, they're slutty, they're stupid, they're catty, whatever the case may be. Like all of those bridesmaids that Logan hooked up with, he said were idiots who were just trying to spread rumors. And then Lindsay was kind of made into like this blonde bimbo type who Rory disrespected. And then like, see, there's this pattern here. And each time Rory is always the one who got away, the first choice, the best pick. Same with Lorelai. There was that co-worker Logan had who was attractive and Rory kept being annoyed at how long her legs were, but Logan was totally totally faithful to Rory and didn't even look at the girl. So that wasn't the most empowering, because it's not really women working with women, it's women against women. But in other aspects, the show does lift women up. For example, how Lorelai and Rory are quite liberated in who they choose to date and who they choose to sleep with, and it's made clear that it should be their choice. Like, especially as Rory grows up, she kind of decides what she wants in her relationships and when she chooses to sleep with the guys. For instance, she starts having this casual relationship with Logan and then decides, actually, that's not for me, I'm a relationship kind of girl. But she doesn't shame girls who do choose to go for a more casual relationship, which I liked. It's just that it wasn't for her. And so in this way, Gilmore Girls is normalizing exploring your sexuality and not making it so big a deal. Additionally, because the show has such strong female characters who are complex and such interesting stories for them, the show does feel like something you should watch. It is funny that the one guy who Emily and Richard actually end up approving of, who they want Rory to marry, is Logan, because their privileges make them more suited to each other, that similarity. And in this sense, Gilmore Girls also has really strong themes of class and how that affects who you're allowed to date and your place in the world. Rory's grandparents do not approve of her first boyfriend, Dean, because they literally say this, like, he's not good enough for her, which is a horrible thing to say because he was so sweet at that point of the show. They were judging him purely because they didn't think he was rich enough or classy enough. And it was silly too, because she was like 16, it was her first boyfriend. Who cares, really? It's not like it's gonna last forever anyway, so you may as well enjoy yourself. Even though at first Rory's furious at them, over time she does start to internalize these values and reject guys like Marty who don't fit this idea she has of who she's supposed to date. Money does change people, and Rory's grandparents do start to rub off on her in not the best way, and her getting involved with them in the pilot episode unfortunately foreshadowed the whole downfall that would follow. Ironically, Logan's parents don't approve of Rory, again tying into class, because they don't think she is worthy of the Huntzberger title. They know that she's high in society but not high enough, and Rory's like, oh my god, do they not know who I am? I'm a freaking Gilmore. My family came in from the Mayflower. Do these people not know who I am? I'm a star. Guess she didn't say all of that, but that was the energy to it, because she really thinks that she is someone. In season 4, Rory gets annoyed at this guy because he's studying under a tree that she considers to be her tree, and in an attempt to get him to move, she throws money at him. She's so entitled that she thinks she can go up to a complete stranger and lecture him about this. And again, her throwing money shows that it's disposable to her now. Through Rory, the show describes how privilege can change you. Rory was always privileged. Her mum did spoil her, but it was worsened by her grandparents and by being in Chilton with all those snobby kids. And Rory, out of everyone, was given the most tools to succeed, far more than her mum, really, because I mean, Rory was raised by a loving parent, so she had that positive encouragement, and yet she's the one that flakes out the most. She only has 2 years left of her degree at Yale. She could just get it over and done with, but no, that's too much for her, because she's never faced proper adversity in her life. The smallest challenges seem like the biggest mountains to climb. Rory can't handle criticism. She needs positive validation to thrive, which is why she disengages when she's not praised. And in the revival, it's hard to believe that in 9 years Rory just hasn't matured. She hasn't emotionally moved on from Dean, her high school boyfriend, nor has she moved on from Logan, who she dated in college. She just is stuck in this cycle. She rejects certain journalism opportunities because she's like, I deserve to be at the top of the game and I'm not going to climb the ladder. I should just get there because I'm awesome. I thought you said the job was mine. My name should be enough. Rory Gilmore. I wrote this really good article one time. She apparently now has no problem with a casual booty call relationship, even though she hated that in the original show. Then she's trying to write a book about her mum and her and their mother-daughter relationship, and her mum isn't very comfortable with that invasion of privacy, and rather than her listening, she says, give me this. I need this. Without this, it's grad school or groveling for jobs I don't want. So first of all, that's quite entitled, because Lorelai's given her so much. She shouldn't need to give really any more. But also, why hasn't she learned anything? It's okay to earn your way in life, to be a hard worker, which were the values that Lorelai at least attempted to instill in her as a businesswoman, as someone who went from pregnant at 16 to owning her own business. Rory has these role models around her, so why is she now assuming that the rules don't apply to her? Maybe you need to do a bit of self-sacrifice. Maybe you won't be able to have the job you love straight away, but who knows, maybe it will take you down a different avenue and you'll realize you love that job. Maybe it won't just work out in 2 minutes. However, I'm glad that she became more realistic in this sense, because if she was just the meek, sweet, hardworking, perfect girl she was at the beginning of the show, not perfect, but mostly perfect, she could be really boring. Like, people would call her a Mary Sue. I'm glad she went through some stuff. Is this life Rory has in the revival? Messing around with Logan, just dawdling around the screen. Is that really what she wanted for herself? I was looking over my notes for Rory and everything, and I realized that Rory appears to have some kind of anxiety. I don't know if it's like an anxiety disorder, like a fully fledged I don't know. I'm not a trained psychologist or anything, okay? I'm just noticing certain behaviors that are interesting. She puts so much pressure on herself for things to work out with Dean. She keeps saying he needs to be her forever person. She wants that stability and consistency, and the thought of one day them breaking up is just unthinkable to her. And she gets really like stressed at the thought of not knowing where things stand with him. And then like with Logan, when they're dating in the early stages and she doesn't really know what they are, she is so anxious, like hovering by the phone. Those are all normal things, right? But when you add on top of it her just crushing fear of not being someone, and how she gets so easily like anxious, and how she tries to avoid real problems by escaping through books and reading about other things and other people. And she's way too categorized and organized with her notes, like with her binders and everything. Everything's just so... I think she has a lot of anxiety in the sense that she doesn't talk or express her feelings. She bottles it up. She won't tell her mum what's bothering her. Even in season 1, she's really worried about failing this test. She doesn't tell her mum, and she's just up late studying and anxious without saying what's going on. And then often what happens is she just ends up exploding. Same with Jess. She's having these feelings for him in season 2, doesn't know how to handle it, doesn't know whether to break up with Dean or not. Anxiety, 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 more anxious. Then she goes and kisses Jess because it just, the emotion explodes out of her. Then she tells him not to tell anyone. Like, huh? What's she doing? She's a people pleaser. Like, she's so scared of people being mad, so she doesn't want to tell of her grandparents too strongly in case they get mad. She doesn't want to call out her mum too much in case her mum gets mad. She doesn't want to break up with Dean because she's so worried about him being upset, and she's constantly soothing him like he's a dog. And the Gilmores have done this to her. They've taught her, including Lorelai, to be insanely avoidant. So when something comes up, she tries to escape the conflict. Like when her and her mum had a big fight in season 4 about her sleeping with a married man, Dean, she just takes off to a trip to Europe with her grandma to avoid having that confrontation with her mum, and she avoids that conversation as long as possible. And even then, when they make up after her sleeping with Dean, they never really talk about it. Like, of course she comes back to her mum and she says, "Oh, I'm sorry mum, I messed up, can we just be friends?" But there's still that elephant in the room around Dean, and it just felt like she just didn't want to go and talk about it. She just wanted to forget about the whole thing. If you want to know more about my thoughts on Rory in more detail and what exact moment led to her downfall and the change in behavior, I made a whole 40-minute video about it. I'll link it up here and in the description if you want to go and watch that. And I talk about like where our illusion of Rory as the perfect daughter is shattered and our expectations for her go out the window. So yeah, I've got more to say, but I don't have time to say it here. Rory's boyfriends. This is probably my favorite part of the show. I'm gonna be real, like I enjoy lots of things about Gilmore Girls. I'm so glad you guys recommended it to me because I've loved watching it for you. This is the perk of being a YouTuber, you know, a film YouTuber. I get the best recommendations. It's amazing. Like normally I'd have to look for this stuff, you guys just tell me, but out of all the things I enjoyed with Gilmore Girls, choosing which guy I wanted Rory to be with was the most fun for me. I don't know if anyone can relate, but just like I literally had diagrams comparing all the men and all their pros and cons, and like, oh my god. I have been as well very balanced, okay? I'm not one of those people that like just jumps to conclusions. Like I really thought about it, and for a long time it was like a really strong tie between Jess and Logan and stuff, and now to me the perfect man is obvious, and it was right in front of our faces all along, even if we didn't want to see it. Who was Rory meant to be with? Who was her true love, if any of them? This is a huge debate in the fandom. Each of the guys fits into like a romance trope figure, which I think makes it more exciting. For instance, Logan is the wild child playboy who changes for that one woman. Jess is the mysterious loner who only likes one girl and hates everyone else. Tristan is the bad boy rebel with a heart of gold. Dean is that first love boy next door who you never get over. Her first boyfriend Dean represents the comfort of home. He's a very symbolic character. He's that nostalgic guy you just have a soft spot for. Like, I kind of still have a soft spot for him. And he also parallels Max, who's Lorelai's first boyfriend on the show, who she kind of sticks with because of his familiarity, but she ends up dumping and leaving heartbroken in the same way that Rory left Dean heartbroken. Rory starts getting this desire to rebel and get out of Stars Hollow, which is reflected in the character of Jess, who arrives and taps into that snarky, cheeky side of herself. Then when she goes for Logan, I mean, he's so far out of Stars Hollow, it's not even funny. It shows how entitled she's become, but also how much she's changed, that kind of guy is attractive to her. And I do not think she would have liked a guy like a Logan in season 1. Like, in season 1, Tristan comes along, he's not that different from Logan, as in he's sort of rich and rich family, and Rory is repulsed by him at first, and it just shows how much her values have shifted. And it's interesting as well how Rory is always trying to get out of Stars Hollow without realizing. Like, she did those 2 big trips to Europe, and then she considered a trip to London, and that's why I always thought that Logan might have been a good match, because I thought they could travel together and do all that, clearly because she wanted to explore the outside world as well as Stars Hollow. But now I want to get into who is the clear winner, like which man is the man of her dreams. And I'm not going to answer this straight away. We're going to go through each guy and lay it all out for you. So we have to start from the beginning in order to do this. Dean was Rory's first boyfriend that obviously didn't last in the show. She doesn't end up with any of the guys by the end of the show, but he seemed so well matched to her at first. Dean in season 1 is so sweet. Like, he brings Rory these cute little gifts, and it's just like a puppy love first crush kind of thing. She just thinks he's tall and handsome, and they have quite an immature relationship, but what do you expect? You know, it's all very sweet. Dean is very emotional, but because he's charming, it allows people to like him, and he even, which I thought, credit where credit's due, he managed to win over Lorelai and make her approve of the relationship when she was so judgy. And I think he has an ability, a way with people that someone like Jess didn't have, where the whole town hated him and basically couldn't get over that initial assumption, because Jess just isn't the most likable guy. Like, he's not very good at making friends, and it kind of worked against him. As a result, because the whole town of Stars Hollow shipped Rory and Dean, Rory again felt this pressure from these watching eyes to stay with him and make it work. And it's interesting because the writers did depict him as the perfect first boyfriend, the guy you want to be your first kiss, your first crush. We need to shatter that illusion right now, because he was not the perfect first boyfriend. He could be reactive, insecure, and just plain pathetic. And I think it's hard because when people around you are constantly telling you how good you two are together, how great that person is, it can warp your perception and make you question your own judgment, which is unfortunately what happened to Rory, where she was seeing red flags but was being told to ignore her own judgment. Their relationship is liked in the town, even when everyone thinks they may have had slept together after Rory's dance. It doesn't matter. It does not affect how people see Dean. They still like him. But the first red flag comes up when Dean tells Rory that he loves her, and she won't say it back because she's not ready. And he gets so angry and breaks up with her and storms off and gives her the silent treatment, which was a sign of his immaturity, to be honest, that he wasn't really ready for a relationship.
Please don't be mad.
Why? Because I say I love you and you want to think about it? I mean, go home and discuss it with your mother? Make one of your pro-con lists? That
behavior in itself is unhealthy, and unfortunately there were a lot of times where it's not that he's an evil guy, it's just that he wasn't ready to be with her, and it manifested in some pretty unhealthy behaviors, like how he was always pushing her away because he was so territorial that his clinginess would just smother her and make her get really, I mean, she was getting an ick. And Rory was always walking on eggshells around him because of his temper. He got super mad when he saw that Rory wasn't wearing the bracelet that he'd bought for her, and she was terrified at the thought of his reaction if he found out that she'd lost it. So she's frantically searching the house, and I was thinking, what do you think he'll do to you if you don't find the bracelet? It's not that big a deal, it's just a bracelet. In season 2, when Rory and Tristan are forced to play Romeo and Juliet, Rory is so scared to be truthful to Dean about this because she's so worried about him being angry at her. He basically shows more jealousy by saying that he's going to sit in at the rehearsals and watch her like a hawk, which makes her really uncomfortable and feel like he doesn't trust her. And then he starts getting super aggressive towards Tristan as well, which was just like, why? Like, he was so easily triggered. Rory feels the need to almost reassure Dean and be like, oh, don't worry, baby, but It's not her job to self-soothe him. These were things that went pretty unnoticed by the fandom at first because, I mean, they're just teenagers, it's young love, making mistakes, but then it got worse and people noticed. Him and Rory had a fight about him liking the idea of a wife who just stays home and cooks her husband meals, and Rory just thinks that's really sexist. Rory ends up getting dressed up in the Donna Reed episode in the super over-the-top outfit and making dinner for Dean as a form of apology of saying, okay, well, if you like this, then I can adapt and I can be that. People were saying that she was doing it to patronize him, but I think she genuinely was trying to impress him and apologize and be like, okay, I'm happy to sacrifice some things. But I honestly found this whole episode really weird. Like, I didn't get what the point of it was. That's her saying that she'll change who she is and what she believes in for him, which I don't really like. Things got worse when Jess arrives, the kind of bad boy figure. There was definitely some writing assassination going on with Dean, where they dumbed down his personality, his intelligence, what he had to offer in order to make Jess look better. And it's like they kind of wanted to make us forget a lot of things about Dean. Like, we know he was smart and he liked reading in season 1, but then they make him seem just really dumb in season 2 onwards, like just genuinely thick. And he's actually not a stupid guy, so I didn't appreciate that. And also, he wore this leather jacket in season 1 and seemed rebellious, and Lorelai was a bit scared of him. She was like, you gotta be careful with boys like that. So he had that bad boy persona, but then they really dull it down, and then in season 2 introduce more of his family and stuff, so he seems like this down-to-earth stars hollow boy, so that Jess's bad boy qualities would stand out more. And I just don't like that because it's a writing inconsistency. He's got a lot of practical skills that I think the show liked to disregard, but Dean was a smart guy. Then they have this basket competition and Dean exhibits really possessive behavior. Jess is trying to trigger him by flirting with Rory in front of him and stuff, and Dean just gets really triggered and storms off. And then he guilted her for liking the town traditions, which is silly because that's something she's passionate about. Like, the whole thing just escalated. The fact that he intimidates her so much when he gets really angry and scares her just isn't healthy. He and he alone is responsible for regulating his emotional reactions. He's going crazy. He's driven crazy by love, and he won't leave Rory alone, and it's giving her an ick because she's just like, ugh, give me space to breathe. And Dean goes to talk to Lorelai about it, and she's like, hun, you've just got to give Rory some space. Then Dean calls Rory like 14 times when she doesn't pick up, and you know, he tries to turn up for dates even when she said she's too busy to hang out with him. Even though people call him the fake nice guy and all this, I genuinely still felt bad for him at this point because he was having his emotions played with, because by this point Rory was messing him and Jess around and not really picking one. She wasn't really being honest with herself about how she felt, and for months Dean knew that something was wrong, and I just have to say that he was pushed to his breaking point. And you can see that when I think in season 2 he breaks up with her in front of everyone at this dance, and he's like, okay, I've had enough, like, you clearly want to be with Jess, so like, go be with him then. However, when I just really couldn't support Dean anymore was in season 3. He and Rory are separated at that point. They broke up, but then he overhears that she had some kind of argument with Jess, so that Jess had upset her, which Jess had. But then Dean goes and punches Jess in the face and starts fighting him, which Rory never asked him to do that, number 1. Number 2, physical violence is just not the answer. It's not sexy. It's just aggressive and ridiculous. Why are you still obsessed with her, mate? Get over it. In season 4, Dean impulsively gets married to someone else, which again, I just hate that. Like, why is he so desperate? Like, just be single. He's so disloyal to her and he clearly wants to be with Rory. And at first, what seemed like a harmless, sweet friendship of them rekindling turns into something horrible. And he's the one initiating and pushing this relationship. He's trying to kiss her. He's showing up to her house to say hi. He's calling her. Like, he is doing 90% of it. And when they end up kissing, he took Rory's virginity knowing that he was with someone and that he still hadn't broken up with her, and that he'd really manipulated Rory by saying, oh yeah, it's not really working with me and Lindsay, like, we're just not good for each other, and making it sound as if him and Lindsay were way more over than they actually were, which is just dishonest. And then Dean would treat his wife Lindsay like shit and yell at her and call her horrible things when she hadn't done anything wrong. All of that just shows his extreme emotional neglect of Lindsay. Even though Rory at that point and Dean aren't officially together, I think like one episode earlier, Jess had showed up at Rory's place to try and win her back. And Dean was trying to be all macho and protective, and I thought that was so silly. Like, Dean had no right to be protective. He's married to someone else. It's not his place to tell her who she should or shouldn't date, and it's honestly very controlling and gross. Then he shuts her out when he assumes she might be seeing Jess again, which is like punishing her. You don't have a right to claim ownership over her. You're not together. She can do what she wants. I also didn't like that Dean had a general lack of enthusiasm about going to balls or events with Rory, being her +1. It's not that big a deal, just go. When Dean and Rory get back together in season 5, their relationship is just awkward. Like, they have nothing to talk about, and I thought this was an extremely realistic part of the show where they're not clicking and the spark's not there, but they just don't know why, and it's simply because they've outgrown each other. And I just love the way it was written, like the awkward lunches and everything. It was just a bit dead, to be honest. It's just lacking something, and he ends up breaking up with her when he sees how much she's outgrown him and her all dressed up in this tiara, and he's like, I can't compete with this life. I can't give you what you need. You're like this rich, fabulous girl. I don't fit in. What am I doing here? Class is an overarching theme in Gilmore Girls, and we see how much it controls people's behavior. People look down on Dean, including the writers, like a tiny bit, in the sense that he's just not seen as valuable enough for Rory, and Luke even tells him this. Luke has this huge chip in his shoulder when it comes to Dean. He's really triggered by him because he sees himself in Dean. It makes Luke salty and uncomfortable because it reminds him of his complete inaction towards Lorelai, that he doesn't feel good enough for Lorelai, that he probably in his mind shouldn't be dating Lorelai at all, because why would she want him and she'd want someone better? And so he sees himself in Dean, and that is like internalized classism at its finest. And it's a shame that this wasn't really talked about much. When he says, you're not good enough to Rory, Dean's like, really? Well, you're just like me. What's the problem? This class thing permeates into everything, including how Jess took so long to initiate things with Rory because he didn't really feel like he was good enough, and he was like, the girls that I like don't like me back because I'm trash and I'm a loser. And I wondered if he was saying that due to his background, the fact that he was working at Walmart instead of going to school. And actually it really upset me that Luke made fun of Jess for working at Walmart. I was like, what's the problem? Literally, what's the problem? At least he's got a job, unlike Rory, who's doing nothing. Jill Winters wrote a really good article where she says that the characters seem to be living in a snow globe, which I thought was interesting because snow is brought up so often. But she said, aside from the Gilmores, the people of Stars Hollow don't seem to change much. It becomes like a scene in a snow globe, and yet they seem much happier than those who've tried to change their lives in some significant way while staying in the bubble of Stars Hollow, like Dean. It's easier to just be content with your simple life and stay in Stars Hollow. Dean was working at the same local grocery store that he had since high school. He might have ascribed feeling trapped to his annoying wife Lindsay, but in reality he was just trapped by Stars Hollow. And maybe that's the problem, because Dean is so tied to Stars Hollow, he never really got to get out there and leave it. Overall, I know Dean was immature, possessive and annoying at times, but he was also a teenager who grew up. He could be very sweet and devoted to Rory, and it's not like Rory was the best girlfriend either, so she worsened Dean's insecurities by doing nothing to reassure him either. Rory would one day look back on Dean and end up regretting the way that she handled things with him, which she did in A Year in the Life, where you see that he's in his 30s now and he's actually mature and has his own family. And when Rory talks to him, she says that their relationship was one that was healthy, positive, and Dean taught her what safe felt like, which seems a little bit like they're revising the narrative of what happened, because Dean definitely did not teach her what safe felt like when they started dating. I'm just gonna say that. Like, we know that when Rory was with Dean, she was constantly anxious and worried, and I don't understand why Dean is so disliked by the community and then people love Jess when they made a lot of mistakes, and some of the mistakes Jess made were actually worse. So I don't get how we can have that double standard where we praise one and then criticize the other for doing the exact same thing. Overall, my take on Dean is that he's not that bad. He was a jerk, and I'm glad that Rory didn't end up with him at points. Like, his behavior in season 4 was not it, but he's not that bad, and I think he turned out to be a pretty nice man when he grew up. I hope he's happy living his own life, even though I don't want him with Rory. But the next guy I want to talk about now is Tristan. even though he's not that big a character, maybe there was an opportunity there to explore something more with Rory, and I felt like it was a real shame that Tristan left the show so soon, because there was so much more they could have explored with him and done with his character. He doesn't know how to get her attention, so his way of getting her attention is by calling her names and bullying her, which is very immature, really. The one thing he has going for him is that he's played by Chad Michael Murray, who's like really attractive, but like that's it.
You tell him.
I don't like it when people say that Logan was Tristan's copy, the exact same, because Logan is so much more of a better person than Tristan. He really is. I don't know if Tristan would have outgrown being annoying and aggressive, because he just was such an idiot, and I don't know if that could change because it was so strong. Like, he called Rory names, including Mary, which Lorelai said was like the Virgin Mary, so making fun of the fact that Rory seems to be a virgin. And yeah, he was often trying to make her uncomfortable as a way of getting her to like him, or physically invading her space. Luckily, before they had their first kiss, he apologized to her for the way he treated her and said he was really sorry. He seemed sincere, so luckily that kind of undid some of it, because he seemed genuinely sorry. Otherwise, them kissing would have been completely out of left field. But I didn't like how he was with her boyfriend Dean. He was so triggered by the fact that she had a boyfriend that he was always finding ways to attack Dean's character or physically intimidate him, and that's just not on. Apparently, Tristan and Rory were meant to end up together, but the actor left the show, and so it didn't happen, and that's why they kind of replaced him with Logan. But honestly, I'm glad he was replaced either way, because Logan is much more of like a well-rounded character, and his relationship with Rory didn't start from him bullying her. But despite my many issues with Tristan's character and him not being as good a character as people think, I was actually really sad when he left, because I felt like I wanted to see what they did with him, and he just sort of disappeared. But still, not the right guy for Rory, that's for sure. He was too immature when they met. I don't know about when they were older, but like the timing was all wrong, that's for sure. The next character is Jess. Take 3, maybe Jess was the right man. He seems to be the most popular guy in the fandom, in the sense that people just really like this guy. He's introverted and quite moody and negative about his life a lot of the time, but he seems to perk up when he's with Rory in the earlier seasons, and he likes her basically the minute he meets her. This is my biggest problem though with Jess and his like role model, well, father figure Luke, is that both of them have issues with talking, with expressing their feelings, and genuinely are very grumpy people who like take their bad mood out on others. But the idea is that they're secretly like quirky and deep. I don't care, go to therapy. Like, I'm not here to be your therapist and hear you like talk about your problems. And a woman, her role in life is not to get you to come out of your shell and get you to open up. Like, you should do that for yourself. It's not Rory's job to try and find ways to make Jess light up. When I watch the show as a 20-year-old, I look at things differently, because I feel like a self-respecting woman, so I want a self-respecting man. Whereas I think if I watched the show when I was, let's say, 14 maybe, and just a bit more like in my quirky era, then maybe I would have thought that Jess was like the dream man, and I'd be like, oh my god, he's so dark, brooding and mysterious. But now I'm older, I'm like, stop. It's funny that everyone blames Rory's later bad attitude on Logan and say he made her that way, when she actually started playing up and being irresponsible. That was when Jess came into her life. And you know what pisses me off? Sorry, it just really does. Is when people say, Logan was a bad influence on Rory, he changed her, not for the better. Like, what, you think Jess was a good influence on her in season 2 when they were like doing shitty things behind Dean's back, and she was flirting with him behind Dean's back, and then she missed her mum's graduation to go and hang out with Jess, and he was like such a bad influence. He was skipping school, he wasn't motivated, and you think a kid like that will make her better? Like, make it make sense. They had this angsty relationship and a lot of fights because they secretly wanted to be together but couldn't, and it was the first time that Rory was just kind of all into the drama and stuff, which I hadn't really seen from her earlier. But when the show starts, Jess just seems really jaded and sad. He doesn't want to be there. He keeps whinging about the fact that he was brought to Stars Hollow and he just can't be asked with anything. I'd say he seems a little bit depressed, to be honest. When he grew up, he experienced a lot of grief that no kid should really have to go through, and no one was really trying to understand him either. But what Jess needed more than anything was not a girlfriend or Rory, it was therapy. He just has a bit of a laissez-faire attitude about drinking, smoking, having a girlfriend, whatever. He's just looking for distractions. He's so smart, but he doesn't apply himself in school sometimes. and he just doesn't see the point of anything. He had a mum who neglected him and just was not responsible, and a non-existent relationship with his father, and so he was sort of just dumped at Luke's. He can't process his feelings because he was never taught to. He hasn't had that strong support network, and he's not nice to Lorelai because he doesn't trust her. Like, he's really good at making enemies, I guess, because that makes him feel safer than having friends. And he feels like Luke didn't want him there, and Luke thought he was a failure, so he doesn't really feel supported in that area either. And then when he arrives in Stars Hollow, he tries to make Rory like him, but she's got a boyfriend. Rory's mum hates him, and the entire town of Stars Hollow hates him and blames him for everything. So this poor kid can't catch a break, and I just felt really bad. It's funny because out of everyone who should have liked Jess, Lorelai should have liked him. She and Jess are so similar. I thought they'd be able to relate to each other. Like, she grew up with parents who were neglectful and didn't understand her either. And in both their teenagehoods, they tried to rebel and do different things, and yet whenever Lorelai looks at him, it's just with distaste, and she says she doesn't trust him, and he makes her uncomfortable. Maybe because he reminds her of the kind of person she used to be in of her childhood, but I thought she'd be a bit more understanding considering he's just a kid. They're both very avoidant people. They both would rather be alone than be committed to someone, and yet she just doesn't like him. Jess is a great character, okay? I love him. He's one of my favorites for a reason, because he's just super interesting, but I didn't want him with Rory. I can get behind why everyone likes him, but that's about as far as it goes. This kid had a lot of issues. I didn't want him with her. I couldn't think of anything worse. He, first of all, really over-attaches himself to Rory. He's one of those kids that's like, I love you and hate everyone else. That's not healthy. He sees her as his safe place to land, his person. You can't have a relationship like that that's sustainable. He needs his own friends, his own life. He can't just hang out with Rory. That's weird. He references her being the only one who ever believed in him, which is, you know, so lovely, but also she's not your therapist. And his trauma and the fact that no one liked him resulted in a lot of very unhealthy behaviors in his relationship with Rory. Him ghosting her and then coming back and dropping a love bomb on her. Him not really being proactive with organizing dates, not really communicating well, and then doing love confessions at inappropriate moments and putting pressure on her. He never had anyone support him. So when Luke is trying to support him, Jess doesn't know how to handle it, and he keeps rejecting it. And honestly, he gave Luke such a hard time. I felt so bad. Like, he wasted so much of Luke's time with his negative attitude. Another struggle they had is that Luke again feels torn between siding with Jess and siding with Lorelai. Lorelai and Jess hate each other, so whenever they have a fight, Luke didn't know whether to tell off and discipline Jess or Lorelai, and that caused a lot of issues with him and Lorelai, because I hated the way that Lorelai reacted to Jess. She just was so judgy and kept assuming that Luke should support her and Rory, and she was saying, you need to take me and Rory's side and forget about Jess. And she was so selfish. She couldn't understand that Luke had a responsibility to Jess as his uncle. He wasn't just going to abandon him. In that sense, I felt bad for Jess because no one was supporting him, but at the same time, Jess also wasn't good enough for Rory when the show started. In season 2, Rory's still like a nice girl, and I felt like she could have done so much better than Jess, and he just didn't treat her well enough. And I didn't really like how he kept trying to like flirt with her and come to the picture when he knew she had a boyfriend. Like, he should have just given her more space. And I really couldn't stand how aggressive he got with her when she didn't want to sleep with him, and how he wasn't stopping when she said to stop. That, for me, it's just too much. I can't get over that. I'm sorry. As the seasons continued, from like season 6 onwards, when he's introduced later, he's been writing his own book and felt like he'd started to love himself more. And yeah, he's just an amazingly nuanced character. I really want him to be happy, but just not with Rory. People liked them so much together because of the element of forbidden romance, and it is like a very sexy idea, but in the long term, I don't think these two would have worked. And I think, ironically, by the end of the show and in the revival, Jess has become too good for Rory. And in many ways, I think they're soulmates. They mirror each other, and I'm not gonna lie, Jess was annoying sometimes. His whole moodiness and like being rude to people for no reason and just causing unnecessary problems, I'm not into that. And people like to romanticize romanticized his earlier behavior when it just wasn't sexy. He was a highly misunderstood character who needed support and therapy and wasn't getting it. And also, I didn't like how he was blamed for Rory's behavior and he just had to take the fall for everything. Like when he and Rory got into a car accident, everyone blamed him, the whole town, even when he'd literally done nothing wrong. You need to give these characters a chance to change and grow up. That includes Rory, that includes Dean. Like, they are teenagers when the show starts, and I just think it's unfair to put high expectations. But even earlier in the show, before the revival, Jess was showing growth. He pushed Rory to go back into college in what possibly is one of my favorite scenes of the show, where he says to Rory, "What are you doing? This isn't you. What happened to your plans for Yale?" And you can just see how much he genuinely cares about Rory making something of herself.
I know you better than anyone. This isn't you.
I don't know.
What are you doing? Living at your grandparents' place? Being in the DAR? No, Yale. Why did you drop out of Yale?
I'm gonna make a whole other video about Jess because I've got too much to say about him. I can't really include it all in this analysis, but my Jess video is coming soon, and let's move on to the next one, which is Logan. So, is Logan the man for Rory? Because we've gone through all of them. He's the final guy in the show. He's the partying rich kid who can't do commitment, but then when he meets Rory, he changes and starts acting like her boyfriend and actually finds it very easy to be in a relationship with her. We know that he's got very nasty parents who put a lot of pressure on him, a lot like Lorelai's parents did. He uses alcohol to handle high stress and also as a way to just have fun, and it's very socially expected in like his circles. He also is very emotional like Rory. Sometimes he overreacts, but as we get to know him, we see that he's actually very loving, hilarious, does these huge romantic gestures whenever he wants to win Rory back, and he's also very brave and really funny. So he has a lot of good sides. Also, he has that slight snobbiness and just thinking he's slightly better than everyone else, which I think meshed him really well with Rory. See, I cannot find any flaws with this boy, aside from the fact that his proposal was too premature. And the executive producer had a very specific idea for what kind of guy they wanted Rory to date. They said, we wanted Rory to date someone like her father. Every girl has a father issue, and Logan was basically Christopher. Logan was charming, smart, and not quite the dependable soul that you need, or at that time was not the great dependable soul. It's a relationship like the one Lorelai and Christopher had in their youth. They do reckless things together, it's fun, but on this lavish scale. And that basically summarizes their relationship. The only thing I disagree with is when people say that Christopher and Logan are the exact same person, because although there are strong parallels there, Logan was the man that Christopher never was. And I think Rory was trying to heal her relationship with her father by dating Logan, but he ended up being way more reliable and stable than Christopher ever could have been, and he actually showed up for Rory in ways that Christopher never did. However, there was some elements of weird writing which unfortunately really affected Logan's character, and it wasn't his fault, it was writing script issues. For example, Logan mistreats Jess and he's really territorial because he feels like Rory was going to cheat on him, which to be fair she kind of was, because she shouldn't have been hanging out with Jess, so whatever. But still, Logan's behavior was really shit. But they separate for a bit, and it was never a discussion of a breakup, they just went quiet on each other, and Logan assumed that it was a breakup, Rory assumed it was a break. But again, their failure to communicate was a cause of that problem. Then when they eventually got back together, Rory found out that he'd slept with a few people during their break. There was no way that Logan would go and sleep with other girls without checking first whether they were actually broken up. It just felt lazy somehow with the writing and just didn't make much sense. Like Rory said, you can't just decide on your own terms that the relationship is over. It was just a cause of unnecessary drama that unfortunately had a negative impact on their relationship. And it was the same thing at the end when he suddenly wants to marry Rory and she refuses him. Why the unnecessary conflict? Why can't they just be happy? This makes no sense. We'd never seen them beforehand discuss marriage, if they wanted it, and suddenly he's just dropping this proposal on her and putting this immense amount of pressure on her at their very young age of like 21. Also, it was a public proposal, which again adds to that sense of pressure. I just don't like it. And then again, he came back and tried at their graduation to propose, and I was like, why is he acting like this is the be-all or end-all if they get married or not? And why was she so hesitant hesitant to marry him as well. Like, it just made no sense on both ends. And it was so disappointing considering he was so ready for commitment, for that next step, and Rory wasn't for some reason. And then the worst part on his end was that he ditched her when she was like, I'm not sure. He was like, fine, screw it, we're over then. He wouldn't just walk away because things got complicated. The whole breakup was weirdly executed. I didn't like it. He did the work. He wanted the relationship to work out. He wouldn't just walk away because she said no to him. Wasn't the best influence on Rory sometimes because he was so laissez-faire. I understand that he tapped into her darker sides. Like, he could have pushed harder for her to go back to Yale. He could have been harsher with it. I agree. He wasn't, but if he pushed her really hard, he risked her shutting him out altogether the same way that she shut out her mother. It was dangerous territory. It's not like she would have responded well if he pushed hard. How can you hate Logan and then love Jess, who got angry and there was this non-consensual kissing thing where she wanted to leave and he yelled like, that was an awful scene, so we're just gonna ignore that. Jess was so mean to Luke. He could be a pretty bad boyfriend, and he cut school all the time, which affected his relationship with Rory. It meant he couldn't graduate. Like, there were so many issues there. And I think the revival really damaged Logan's reputation with the fans because it confirmed our worst fears that he was just messing Rory around and using her for her body and all this stuff that just, I don't think the writers liked Logan, and that was the biggest problem. I always felt like they just favored Jess, and it just bothers me because Logan is just such a good match for her, and I don't think he should be disrespected like he was in the revival, where it felt like, to me, the revival's just not endgame. It's just not, because it doesn't feel natural. The writers were doing whatever they could to make Dean look bad, to make Logan look like a non-commitment guy, just to make Jess look better, and that's not fair. What bothered me the most about the revival, aside from everything, is how they just completely trashed Logan's character. He and Rory are yet again in that no commitment, friends with benefits type of relationship, which is exactly what they worked through not doing in the original show and said they would never do again. They said they would take each other seriously, that they could never just be casual. Logan went through adversity and struggle. He made a really bad business decision that lost him money, where people were ashamed of him, where he had to overcome it, he had to grow, he had to learn, and then in the finale he had a job secured in like San Francisco or something to be his own man, his own person. I was so proud of him, and then they just tossed it all in the trash in the revival. If you just ignore the revival and we just pretend that never happened, Logan was the best option for her. Out of all the guys, Logan stood out because of how much he changed, he grew. He defended Rory to his family time and time again, stood up to Lorelai when she judged him and tried to prove her wrong, tried to prove he was worthy. He was proud to call Rory his girlfriend. He didn't want her with anyone else. He was proud to be with her. He's working to build his own life and be his own man, to get out of his father's shadow, and I was really proud of him. I don't like the revival because of how that was all stripped away from him, and now he's gone back to trying to please his parents by dating the appropriate person, someone like, what was his girlfriend called, Odette, who he feels like he looks good with, rather than listening to his own feelings. And I'm just devastated that they assassinated him like that because he deserved better. They were going to jump off the top of that building together with their little umbrellas, and she said, if you jump, I jump, Jack, and that was the moment I knew they're beautiful.
You did good, Ace.
Once in a lifetime experience.
Only if you want it to be.
Now, if you still need some convincing about Logan, which I totally understand, I do have a whole video about Rory and Logan. It's like 40 minutes about why they should have been together. I'll link it up here and in the description. I go into detail about how Logan proved himself in various ways and 21 reasons why they're really good together, and good stuff he did that people overlooked. So maybe go watch that before you try and tell me that they're bad together, because I think it's at least worth exploring the idea of giving him a chance. However, if you don't like him, I do fully respect your opinion, and I don't think we have to always agree. But yeah, a lot of people have actually sent me messages about that video and said that I changed their mind on Logan, which I'm so happy about. Like, I'm so glad I'm converting more people. But now let's talk about Lane and just some more secondary characters. I hope you guys are enjoying this, by the way. Oh, if you are enjoying it, give it a thumbs up, because I can reach more people and then I can keep making more videos like this. So So Lane's Rory's best friend, and she kind of contrasts Rory in a lot of ways. Like, Rory was given a lot of freedom where Lane was restrained, and where Rory collapsed the minute an obstacle came up, Lane was really determined and kept persisting no matter the odds. And we do get a lot of themes of motherhood continued through Lane's character and her relationship with her mother, Mrs. Kim. Now, there are a lot of parallels between Mrs. Kim and Emily Gilmore as, I guess, the stereotype of the controlling, overbearing mother, but they're also really different in many ways. Mrs. Kim actually listened and could change, where I don't think Emily could at points. And although she was too strict, I do think she realized she had to sacrifice some things in order to have a relationship with Lane. Lane still respects her mum because she understands that her mum is just doing her best.
Hit me! It's my fault! Hit me!
During the
A new child is a great blessing.
She says congratulations.
Really? Then you should say Chuka Hamnida Hamnida, because we're having twins.
Twins?
Twins.
However, I do think that at points, Mrs. Kim really crosses the line from strict to controlling and just horrible. She really rules Lane under an iron fist, and the way that she grounded her or said she couldn't use the phone or couldn't go outside or whatever was just really horrible. It's proven that shame is a really powerful emotion, and shaming your child on a regular basis is really damaging. Lane isn't allowed to like what she likes or eat what she wants or be her own person, and it meant that she settled in a lot of her romantic relationships because she felt a lot of internalized shame about going after what she wanted. I understand if Mrs. Kim was just really stressed, like she had 5 kids to manage and she was run off her feet and it was just too much, but she only has 1 kid and she still managed to fuck up so bad. That's why you need to rewatch this show perhaps, because you'll notice these things that maybe you originally overlooked. But Mrs. Kim's biggest mistake was when she told Lane to move out of home that one time and they had that really big fight. She was only willing to love Lane if Lane was exactly the mold of what she wanted her to be. Lane had to hide when she had a crush, she had to hide what she was interested in, and by the end of the series she did accept more that maybe Lane wasn't perfect, but she was still her daughter and she'd have to compensate on some things. For example, Mrs. Kim was always so against Lane's music love, but then she ended up having to accept it. One day Lane told her, "Mom, it looks like the band may be breaking up. We've hit a rut. We can't get any gigs to get any momentum, and I don't know, it's just not working. I think I may need to move back home." Mrs. Kim replies, "You are not the daughter I raised. Kims don't give up." So in that sense, Mrs. Kim is there for her daughter. Another thing that's interesting is the contrast between Rory and Lane's boyfriends. That's always super funny because I felt like Lane's relationships were always so chill in comparison to Rory, where her boyfriends were always like having fights and fighting over her. These 2 guys both like Lane, I think it was Dave and another guy, and they're having a conversation and they're like, okay, I know we both like her, but let's just keep it respectful. And then the door bursts open and Jess and Dean like run into the room like tackling each other and throwing each other over the table, knock the 2 boys over as they barge in, like they literally knock them over. Oh, it was so good.
Just a talk. We'll keep it friendly, honest.
I have to say that Lane and Dave were the sweetest couple and I felt like they really worked together. Dave was definitely one of the least toxic boyfriends in the show, and I just felt like it was such a shame that they didn't last. Actually, apparently Lane's character was based off the producer Amy's bestie in real life, whose husband is called Dave, which is another sign that Lane and Dave were meant to be together, and I feel really upset with how their relationship ended. It just feels really unfair. And also I don't like in general how Lane was sidelined by the writers, because it felt like in every scene it's just Rory talking about her problems and Lane listening, and then Lane has this really bad first sexual experience that just felt really unfair, and then she gets pregnant because of it, which is also not fair. And I don't like how Lane had to take over her mum's business in the revival rather than like having her own thing and getting her dreams. And I understand that she seems happy at the end, but that doesn't mean I'm happy for her. And like, I'm glad she seems happy, but it's not what I wanted for her. I didn't want her settling down with the first guy she properly dates, Zach, who was a loser anyway. I don't like how he broke up the band and he was just sort of an idiot, and like when he's first introduced he seems so clown-like and comical. It's really hard to actually accept that one day he'll end up with her. I could maybe get behind them dating for a bit, which is a stretch, but them getting married is just too unrealistic for me and it doesn't make any sense. Lane started hating sex and then they just sort of forgot about that storyline. That was just not on. Emily described Lane as Rory's Asian friend. The fact she doesn't even refer to her by name when Rory and Lane have been best friends for years just seems frankly disrespectful. And also like the very stereotypical portrayal of Mrs. Kim as this conservative Christian who doesn't want Lane to listen to music, to to eat what she wants, to talk to boys, to like leave the house to go to a party, how she is seriously uncomfortable with sex, how she speaks with this heavy accent. That's a very problematic portrayal of her. She's the one that's being harsh and controlling, but we just never meet Mr. Kim. I know it's a running joke in the show that he's just never there. He's always absent. Let's start with Luke, shall we? Lorelai and Rory had a lot of love interests, some of which were very much necessary, others felt less necessary. In the article, It Takes a Classless Heteronormative Utopian Village, Gilmore Girls and the Problem of Post-Feminism, Danielle Stern states that the character of Luke was originally written to be a woman. However, network executives, who Amy did not name, said there was a lack of testosterone on the program and strongly encouraged her to add a central male figure. It seems like they want to make our characters feminist and empowered, but at the same time not alienate the male viewers and still include them. The executives were not only adding testosterone for the sake of male viewers, but also by privileging potential romantic narratives. We have a desire for stories devoted to romantic love over family dynamics, and viewers overwhelmingly focus on Lorelai and Luke's storylines compared to plot development between Lorelai and Rory and their relationship, which is really interesting to me. Yeah, Luke is like that guy who's Lorelai's best friend, but also her future lover, which adds that romantic tension to the show. And Luke has many traditionally feminine characteristics, like the fact that he cooks, he cleans. Luke often encourages the girls to eat healthy, and he tries to put some more greens in their food or tells them to eat better. And they always say that he's being annoying when he does this. Actually, maybe that's because he has some trauma, because he's also really scared of hospitals. So he seems to have this fear of like bad health and sickness. Was Luke a good love interest for Lorelai? Were they meant to be? In season 1, his crush on Lorelai was adorable and I really rooted for them. He obviously was besotted with her, and I just really like that whole friends to lovers thing. Even when he and Lorelai have broken up, he'll be by her side no matter what if something bad happens. And I also like that he was happy to just be her friend and never would have pressurized her into a relationship. And he was also really good to Rory, and he acted like more of a dad than Christopher ever did. And I love how he listens to Lorelai and how he always does these acts of service rather than words, like how Lorelai told him she loves snow and then he ends up building an ice rink for her. The amount of things that he fixes and mends for her.
Your vision! Suki, we have ice!
Hallelujah!
How did you know?
Well, good rule of thumb is you can never have too much ice.
Oh, you're the best!
The build up to their relationship was impeccable, but then when they actually got together, it just fizzled out and I just didn't ship them anymore. I was kind of done with them by the end, like the stupid arguments, the bad communication. It was just already immature. And I also found Luke after a while too aggressive and whiny. Like in season 1 and 2, I completely adored him, and I thought it was really funny how unprofessional he was with his customers, like how he'd treat them well if he was in a good mood and then bad if he was in a bad mood, and how he'd literally grab them and throw them out of the shop if they were annoying. Like I just found that so funny. But after a while, it started to not be funny, and I was thinking, okay, he's just driving customers away. Like you cannot keep taking out your negative attitude on people. He got so angry at Dean and banned him from the diner and tried fighting him in the middle of the street, fighting a teenage boy. That was so pathetic and immature, and I could never get over that. He's a really good guy, you can't deny that for the most part, but also like the whole immature thing, I just didn't find that attractive. Like he's nice, but I don't know why, I just really went off him and Lorelai by the end, and I didn't really care whether they were together or not. As for Christopher, he's like a secondary love interest for Lorelai, and at points he's a very strong contender and like competitor to Luke. I liked Chris and Lorelai at first, but then I realized that their relationship seemed very reliant on their banter rather than having real deep conversations, and he kind of brought out that childlike side of her even more, which isn't so good. He had this great energy in season 1, they have this flirty banter, they have a lot of chemistry, but that's all they've got. And when you really realize that he never visited Rory properly in Stars Hollow until she was like 16, you're like, damn dude, where were you? He only wants to be involved in Rory's life if he's dating Lorelai. If he's not dating Lorelai, then he doesn't want any involvement in Rory's life, and he kind of comes and goes when he pleases. He's not stable. I actually feel like he's a really terribly written character because of how he appears and disappears whenever the plot requires him to. Also, he ties into too many unhealthy romance tropes that I don't like. For instance, him feeling owed a relationship with Lorelai. They'd sleep together when she was feeling low and vulnerable. I mean, maybe it only happened once or twice, but I don't like it. And just because she in the moment consented doesn't mean that she was in the right headspace to be doing doing that with him, and she only had just broken up with Luke, and then she starts dating Christopher, and he's really pushing for like a serious relationship and kids, and I was just like, whoa, hold your horses. However, I do feel like Christopher improved over the series, and he learned some really powerful life lessons. It felt very karmic when he became a single parent and realized how hard it must have been for Lorelai, and I just really loved that arc for him, and I think it made him a more empathetic person, and he's really not that bad. He's just not my favorite character. Paris is like up there for me. She is one of the best characters in the show. Like, even though I found some of her storylines really boring, she's just such a great character that I don't really mind. And also she's just really needed in the show because she teaches the value and importance of just being yourself. Like, people are so intimidated by her intelligence and find her like a boring girl or a drag, or they don't like how direct she is about her goals and being competitive, and she shows a lot of masculine qualities, and so I think people shame her because they don't think she behaves as a traditional woman should. But I like that Paris subverts those expectations for what a woman should be, and she isn't afraid to just go after what she wants, even though she knows that people will judge her or try and shame her into being more submissive. And she's just not a passive character. She's very dominant, and I love that. Actually, I think it really works. I mean, some things stay the same, like she'll always be kind of socially inexperienced because she's so focused on academia, but in other ways she developed. In season 1, she's horrible to Rory and bullies her because she sees her as a rival, but then later ends up learning that her and Rory can actually grow and learn from each other. So in season 3, she actually claims that Rory is her best friend and really cares about her, and I just love that development. Also, they have a nice contrast because Rory's more quietly confident and meek and passive, whereas Paris is out there, she's proactive, and so she taught Rory a lot of things. In fact, I don't think Rory would have gotten into Yale without Paris. She's not a whinger, she just gets on with it. And also, like, she was really kind to Rory, encouraging her to go back to college. One time Logan was messing Rory around, and so Paris goes and tells him off. She was a good friend. One time Dean came around when Jess was in the house talking to Rory. Rory was doing the wrong thing by hanging out with Jess behind Dean's back because it's like emotional cheating, but Paris totally saved Rory's ass, and she lied and she pretended that she had a crush on Jess, and that's why he was around, because she'd invited him.
It's looking complicated, and I'm trying to explain it to you.
That's crap.
It's my fault.
What?
It's my fault that Jess was here.
Despite Rory continually upstaging Paris or getting opportunities that Paris had worked way harder for and deserved, it didn't stop Paris from being friends with her in the long term. Then when Rory found out that Paris was her roommate, she's a bit disappointed, but she does get on with it and actually ends up finding it not that bad and still lives with her later. When both girls were dumped and single, they could, I guess, be sad together and watch movies. Their relationship was imbalanced and it was more unrequited, and I don't really think Rory considered Paris a close friend. She continues to be hesitant to call Paris her friend, and Paris thought that Rory was there to comfort her after her breakup from Doyle, but I mean, Rory was only really there because she needed a place to stay. The show kind of plays with the idea of Paris and Rory being romantically interested in each other, but it never really goes there because the show is so focused on heterosexual couples. In season 1, Paris annoyed Rory by reading a love quote from Shakespeare, which just seemed like the romantic setup to something, and the way that Paris keeps holding onto a grudge towards Rory for no seemingly understandable reason implies that she has maybe romantic feelings there she doesn't acknowledge. And then at a season 4 college party, they kiss on the lips to try and seem cool and fit in, and then Rory says, "Get away from me, you're not my type." So they're hinting at it through the dialogue and stuff, but not really going there. Paris and Rory would actually make a lot of sense as a couple, which is quite ironic. In the article, The Politics of Literacy and Family in Gilmore Girls, it explains how Paris is shamed for being intimate with someone. Paris suggests that her sexual behavior is responsible for her rejection from Harvard. She says, "I had sex, but I didn't get into Harvard. Rory never had sex, so she'll probably go to Harvard." Obviously, this speech is intended to be humorous. The fact that Paris had sex has nothing to do with the fact that she was not accepted to Harvard and Rory was, though the writers are clearly poking fun at Paris here. But the problem is when it ties into the other sexuality issues, with failure in academia being linked to having sex. I also really hated Paris's subplot with that Professor Asher when she was at uni, because I felt like she was being taken advantage of, especially because of how emotionally immature she is. It just didn't feel right, her dating someone that much older. She's looking for a parental figure because her parents aren't there. It's like more she's looking for a parent than for a partner. You know that she spends more time with her nanny than with her parents, so they're very much absent. Side note, I know I shouldn't laugh, but I found it so funny when Asher died. It's like, he's so old that he dies. Like, ew, I just can't. Like, I don't know. It was so funny. I know I shouldn't laugh, but just Oh. Now, as for Suki, she's a really well-balanced character. She's clearly really passionate about her job, so expressive and playful, and I grew really fond of her, and I love that they didn't make her whole personality around her weight. But I also found a lot of her storylines really boring, and I was kind of falling asleep. Also, there was a very problematic storyline with her husband Jackson. After having 2 babies, Suki was done with having kids, and she wanted Jackson to have a vasectomy, and it seemed like he went along with it, but then she found herself pregnant and realized that he'd lied and he hadn't got one. On both ends, it's wrong. She shouldn't have pressurized him into getting one because it's his body, but he never should have lied. And our final kind of supporting character is Michelle, who's the main black character in the show, and he's the concierge at the inn where Lorelai works, and his character's like meant to be really funny because he's so uptight and snobby and quite negative and cynical about romantic relationships. But again, he seems a bit like a caricature, like his exaggerated French accent and how often he's more there as like the comic relief. I felt like he should have had more of his own stuff going on. This show isn't the most diverse, is my point. But the final thing I want to talk about is the evolution of the show and how it changed, because now we've covered the key characters. What made the show so successful, right? Like, why are we still thinking about it years later? Why are we still watching videos about it? I like it just because it's an easy, comfortable comfort watch, and coincidentally I started watching it in autumn, which was the perfect time to watch it, and the vibes are just immaculate. However, I don't think the show is as incredible as people make it out to be. I mean, clearly there's plenty here for critical analysis, and it's very well written. There's a lot of thought that went into it, but also like it's not the best show I've ever seen, and there were a lot of really boring, dragged out filler scenes involving Kirk and Taylor and the town meetings and slow-paced plot that I wasn't a fan of. The first 3 seasons in particular have a really good vibe. There's this fun dynamic with Rory where she's still likable, and obviously the cute relationship unfolding between Lorelai and Luke, and the camera quality has like this really almost fuzzy vintage effect that I just am obsessed with. My most favorite season was season 3, but my other favorite season was actually season 5, purely because Logan saved the season, and I felt like his introduction really spiced up the show again. Rory's serious mistakes and her burnout from season 4 onwards definitely dampen the fun, exciting vibe of the show and the humor of it, because she has to deal with the real consequences of her actions, but it's still a good show. But I think part of the reason it's so successful is the nostalgia, because we grow up with the characters and we see them go from like kids to graduation to getting married. And I also love how the show handles time. Pretty Little Liars, for example, had the most confusing timeline ever, where you cover so many murders and accidents and school years in the space of like 2 months, and it just doesn't make sense. Whereas Gilmore Girls has a very consistent timeline, and it's also really easy to understand whether it's a school day or not, or whether it's a Friday night dinner, or whether it's the weekend. Seasons 1 to 3 I think were the most iconic, but season 3 was my favorite because that's when the characters could really develop on their arcs. So everything came to a head with Dean and Jess. We had Rory's graduation from high school. We had Jess leaving Stars Hollow. We had Dave and Lane's relationship starting, and it still had that really magical, exciting vibe. I didn't love season 4 because Rory's subplots were so boring and detached from everything else that was going on, because she's at college and it was just like so boring. But season 5 got better because of Logan being introduced, and obviously him challenging Rory, pushing her outside of her comfort zone. Season 7 was my least favorite because I felt like it was very slow paced and kind of dull, and I think that was due to like a change in direction with how the show is being run. Still great obviously, but just the subplots weren't as interesting to me. And Amy Palladino revealed how the CW wanted to unfairly place a majority of the workload on her and her husband instead of putting up the funding needed to add more writers and producers. She wasn't involved with that final season, and maybe that's why it was weird. But this is why many people prefer the revival and the ending of the revival, because Amy was actually involved with that, and so she got to produce the ending that she wanted, that was authentic to her. Because in the original show Gilmore Girls, everything passed through her, you know, the scripts, and she was involved with how the show was shot, how it was edited. If she's not present, then you can obviously feel the difference. Yeah, I'm just gonna end this video with a bang. Those are my overall thoughts on Gilmore Girls. Thank you for recommending it. I've had people telling me I needed to watch it for like a year, ever since my Pretty Little Liars series, and I kind of put it off, but you guys recommend the best stuff. This was right up my alley, so if you want me to talk about some more older shows from the 2000s or something, then please let me know, because this stuff is my jam. But thank you so much for watching, guys. Mwah.